Hey, is this working? Yes, it sounds like it is. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. What a wonderful, wonderful turnout. It's just so exciting to see so many people here today, especially on a rainy day. Welcome to the Syracuse Florence Graduate Symposium in Italian Renaissance Art, and welcome on a year where this auspicious event is being hosted on the 60th anniversary of a very prestigious program that we're all very proud of. So it's just wonderful to see you all, and thank you for coming. My name is Erica Wilkins, and I'm the Executive Director of Syracuse Abroad and an Assistant Provost at Syracuse University. It is an honor, really an honor, to be here today to recognize the storied legacy of this program and to celebrate the 60th anniversary with the longstanding leadership of the program, esteemed colleagues and partners, and most importantly, with current and former students of this program, their families, community partners, and supporters, and all of you who are here with us in person today, and all of you who are here with us virtually. So welcome our virtual attendees as well. This program, as you all know better than anyone, reflects one of the most longstanding and strongest partnerships between Syracuse Abroad and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Syracuse University. The master's program was launched in 1964, just 5 years after the Syracuse University opened the program in Italy for the first time in the Villa Rosa back in 1959. And the opportunity provided through the master's program for students to spend a year at the Syracuse Florence Center studying, researching, learning, and growing has been a foundational crown jewel in the university's outstanding academic programming abroad for 6 decades now. In this context today, we're also very honored to welcome the Dean of Arts and Sciences for Syracuse University, Professor Behzad Mortazawi, and he will be speaking after me. I also want to take this opportunity to really pause and highlight the passionate, dedicated leadership and expertise of the leaders of this program. Dr. Sally Cornelissen, who is a professor of art history on our main campus in Syracuse, and the director of the Florence Master's Program since 2015. And Professor Molly Bourne, the program's Florence coordinator since 2012. Without their expertise and extreme dedication, none of this would be possible. I also want to recognize Professor Sasha Perugini, who, as a part of her larger responsibilities as the director of Syracuse University Abroad in Florence since 2011, and is our director of global innovation, has ensured full support for the success of this program for more than a decade, leading us through the years, including through some of our most difficult moments, such as the COVID emergency, which we will now promptly forget about. Well, there are others who have far more expertise than I on this program and its legacy. I think it's really important to recognize how renowned this master's program is, not only for the incredible hands-on research our students conduct in local archives, libraries, museums, and churches, but also for the exceptional training that they receive in effectively communicating their findings, not only to specialized audiences, but to general ones. The strength and quality of this program are a testament to the talented scholars who guide our students in their research and symposium preparations, and of course, the high caliber of students that they teach, who we are celebrating today. Over the years, many of these outstanding graduate students have been accepted into top-tier PhD programs and have gone on to have distinguished academic careers in art history and other areas. Others have pursued advanced degrees in archival research, library science, or museum studies. Some of these graduates now hold tenured teaching positions here in Florence with Syracuse University, or work with the center in other capacities, including leading academic site visits for our students. Often, and many of you are among them, alumni return to Florence to visit their professors and peers who continue to work at cultural institutions throughout the city. These accomplished graduates not only enhance the prestige of the master's program, they also enhance the prestige of Syracuse Abroad and Syracuse University more generally, not only in the United States, but internationally. They play a pivotal role in spreading the awareness and appreciation also about the richness of Italian culture and art history on a broader scale. And these kinds of reflections and this kind of impact is more important than ever as we move into a phase of an epoch of history where sometimes the arts, history, these kinds of recognitions and representations and understandings are getting lost in the speed and pace of change. So we're grateful for the scholarship, we're grateful for the leadership, and we're grateful for the impact that you will all continue to have as we move forward. Before we turn to this wonderful cohort of current impressive graduates to share the results of their work, I would like to thank you all again for joining us, for giving me a few minutes to celebrate this program on this 60th anniversary. And I would now like to pass the podium to our esteemed Dean of Arts and Sciences, Professor Behzad Mortazawi.
Good afternoon, everybody. I realize we're all here to hear about the students, and so I'll keep my comments short, but I want to take this opportunity to share some remarks with you. Let me start by thanking Sasha Bergini and the entire Syracuse Abroad team who have hosted us over the past few days. It's been an honor to be here amongst you and to visit with this program. There are two special alumni who are with us today that I'd like to acknowledge. The first is Andrew Rassinen, right here, class of 1973 and a member of the College of Arts and Sciences Dean's Advisory Board. He studied in Florence as an undergraduate, and since then he's been a supporter of the program, and I'm grateful for his presence today and the strategic counsel he provides me on the board. The other is Peter Weller. Peter, where are you? Oh, there you are. Yes, Dr. Weller, he's a true Renaissance man. In the midst of his successful Hollywood career, he went on to earn an MA from our program and later on a PhD from UCLA. And I just learned that his latest book with Cambridge University Press will be coming out shortly. He has been extremely generous along with his family and established the Theodore, Martha, and Peter Weller Scholarship Fund so that more of our students can pursue their dreams and to study in Florence. Thank you, Andrew and Peter. I also like to acknowledge my wife, Dr. Pamela Young. She's in the back. When Professor Cornelison invited us to join you a few months ago, we couldn't pass up the opportunity to come to a city that means so much to us personally. Alumni, faculty, staff, and especially students, it's an honor to be here with you in this beautiful Villa Rosa, as together we celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Syracuse University Graduate Program in Art History, a program that has made its mark on the lives of countless students. Let us now give a big round of applause to honor the program, its legacy, and all of you. Congratulations on 60 years. I don't need to tell you, but the Florence Graduate Program is one of the College of Arts and Sciences signature offerings and the oldest U.S. accredited MA and art history program in which students primarily study in Florence. It is recognized internationally as much for its challenging curriculum as for the quality of its alumni. Back in 1964, Professor Abraham Weinus and William Fleming founded this program out of the belief that students should experience the art of Renaissance firsthand. Their vision has been carried both since with excellence and pride. What distinguishes our Florence program from others is the rigor of the study it requires, which rivals that of a PhD program, and incredible on-site research opportunities. In higher education, we often talk about learning outside the classroom and hands-on learning. This is literally the case here in the cradle of Renaissance, where our students get to live, study, and walk the same street that the celebrated artists such as Michelangelo, Leonardo Botticelli, so many others and hundreds of years ago have walked. Such firsthand experience with the works of these and other artists and architects, as well as the access they have to exceptional libraries, archives, and museums, enriches students' research and scholarship and makes it far more meaningful. All of these experiences lead to superb career opportunities and provide invaluable preparation for the next phase of their education. It is a point of pride for all of us here that many Florence graduates, students go on to extraordinary careers, not only in academia and the art world, but also in the fields such as marketing and architecture. As program director, Professor Cornelison puts it so well, the program attracts higher caliber students who are very motivated and go on to do extraordinary things in art history and beyond. For example, Caitlin Petty of the class of 2019 is a PhD candidate at Washington University, St. Louis. She's spending 2 months in Italy as part of the mentored professional experience at the University of Rome. Caitlin, will you please wave your hand so we can recognize you? There you go. Some other alumni with us today are Elaine Ruffalo, Christina Mitchett, and Jennifer Cowden. So would you please raise your hand so we can recognize? Thank you. Their accomplishment and those of all the Florence alumni speak to the program's value and influence in art, culture, and academia. Students, you too will soon be making your own mark on the world. This afternoon, I look forward to seeing the results of your hard work over the past year. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge that much of the program's success today is due to the dedication of Professor Sally Cornelison, an expert in the history of Italian late medieval and Renaissance religious art. Not only is she the program director, but she's also a program alumni. Since becoming director in 2015, Professor Cornelison has upheld and enhanced the founder's vision, working closely with the Florence graduate faculty to keep the program up to date with regard to current trends and scholarship and ensure that its students have a challenging but at the same time personally rewarding educational experience. I'm grateful for her dedication to our students, and I'm confident that under her leadership, the Florence graduate program in art history will continue to thrive and nurture promising scholars of many, many years to come. Now, please join me in welcoming Professor Cornelison, Director of the Florence Graduate Program in Italian Renaissance Art. Sally?
Thank you so much. I am really delighted to be here to celebrate our graduate students, this milestone anniversary with all of you this afternoon. It's nice to see the room filled all the way to the back. Just warms my heart. The Florence Graduate Symposium is always a special event, but this year it's even more so because we have so many special guests and alumni in attendance. I'd like to begin by thanking Erica, Sasha Perugini, and Dean Moritzavi, and his staff in the College of Arts and Sciences, as well as my colleagues in the Department of Art and Music Histories. We simply can't do what we do without your support. I completed the Florence Graduate Program in 1989, was hired to direct it in 2014, which was the year we celebrated its 50th anniversary, and joined the SU faculty the following year. In many ways, this job has been a labor of love, and I'm fully aware that I stand on the shoulders of giants such as Gary Radke and Rab Hatfield, with whom many of us studied and whose lessons have guided and continue to guide us in myriad ways. Rab is with us this afternoon. Rab, if you can give us a wave. Where are you, Rab? There you are, Rab. So let's give him a warm round of applause. I never cease to be amazed by the collegiality of Florence Graduate Program alumni, and the group assembled here today is proof of that. Some of my best friends did the program, all in different years, and I've collaborated professionally with many others. I often jokingly refer to us as the Florence Graduate Program Mafia, but that's, those of you who I recruited, you probably heard me say this, but that's an unnecessarily sinister moniker for what really is a tight and mutually beneficial network. The alumni in attendance today are wearing name tags to identify them, and I'd like to single out a few. As Dean Morditsavi noted, Dr. Peter Weller is with us today, and I join the Dean in thanking him for his support of the program and look forward to awarding the first Theodore, Martha, and Peter Weller scholarships in the new year. Peter flew from California to be here, as did Nicole Squires-Marca, who is another generous supporter of our students. I encourage other alumni to follow her and Peter's example to ensure the viability of the program to its 75th anniversary and beyond. A special shout out also goes to two members of the class of 2020, Katie Seedy and Catherine Torrey. Katie and Catherine, where are you? There you are. It absolutely broke my heart, as I know it did theirs, that they had less than 3 months in Florence before the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're not forgetting it immediately, Eric. I was going to bring it back. Before the pandemic broke out, scattered them and the rest of their cohort across the United States and as far as China, and relegated us to a symposium on Zoom. You all did amazing research and delivered polished capstone symposium papers, despite not having adequate access to libraries and archives. So kudos to you. Fortunately, the Florence graduate program weathered the COVID storm, and it continues to thrive. In August, we welcomed the largest cohort in our history, who should be watching, and a wave to you, 12 students to the main campus. They're very excited at the prospect of continuing their studies in Florence in January. I'd now like to take this opportunity to thank the graduate faculty, beginning with Molly Bourne, the Florence coordinator, who, like me, is an alumna of the program and who works tirelessly to ensure our students' intellectual and personal well-being and maintain our high academic standards. Brian Breggy, Margaret Innes, and I taught the students whose papers you will hear today during their first semester in Syracuse. After they transferred to Florence earlier this year, they continued their coursework with Molly Bourne, Jonathan Nelson, Matteo Duni, and Sean Nelson, the latter of whom is also an alumnus. Under their expert guidance, our students engage with leading scholars, museum curators, and works of art and architecture, handle and transcribe archival documents, conduct original research, and, as you'll see today, prepare and deliver professional presentations. For nearly 40 years, Florence graduate students have also taken a seminar on the history of art techniques and conservation with Diane Kunzelman, another alumna, and Ezio Buzzegoli, both highly esteemed paintings conservators who worked in the restoration lab of the Uffizi Galleries and later at the central lab at Florence's Fortezza da Basso. For just shy of 2/3 of the 60 years it has been in existence, Diane and Ezio have been an indispensable part of the Florence graduate program. A couple of months ago, they let us know that this is the last semester they will teach their course. We will miss them tremendously and are so very grateful for all they have done for us and our students, and I think this deserves a reward. Siamo commossi. It's now time to turn the reins over to my colleague, Molly Bourne. After completing the Syracuse Florence graduate program in 1988, Molly earned a PhD in art history at Harvard University. Since taking over as Florence graduate coordinator in 2012, she's guided multiple cohorts of talented students to this capstone event in their graduate careers, just as she has done this year. Molly.
Thank you, Sally. Good afternoon and welcome. Whether you are with us in person or watching via the live broadcast, we are delighted that you have joined us for the 38th Annual Florence Graduate Symposium in Italian Renaissance Art, and also this year, the celebration of our program's 60th anniversary. Before turning to our student presentations, I invite those of you who are here to please make sure your telephones are silenced. Second, like Sally, I wish to thank the director of Syracuse Florence, Sasha Perugini, and the many staff members who have been working behind the scenes to ensure the smooth operation of this milestone event. From symposium promotion and photography to preparation of the live stream, setup, and the refreshments that those of us who are here will enjoy today, their support has been indispensable. I join Sally in expressing gratitude to my extraordinary graduate faculty colleagues here at Syracuse Florence, Ezio Buzzegoli, Matteo Duni, Diane Kunzelman, Jonathan Nelson, and Sean Nelson, who have taught and mentored this group of students with such dedication over the past year, guiding them to this capstone moment of our program. My feelings of gratitude are especially bittersweet for Professors Buzzegoli and Kunzelman, who, as Sally just mentioned, will retire later this month. Diane and Ezio are professional paintings conservators with storied careers at the prestigious Restoration Laboratory of the Opificio delle Pietre Dure, where they have conducted scientific investigations on and restored masterpieces by Renaissance artists, including Botticelli, Michelangelo, Bronzino, Pontormo, and others, publishing their findings in numerous scholarly journals and exhibition catalogs. Diane was a Florence Fellow in our program in 1968, just 4 years after the Great Flood of 1966. Her career in conservation was inspired and shaped by her participation in the massive cleanup of artworks that took place in those years. Diane and Ezio's seminar in the history of conservation has become a beloved and crucial pillar of our program's curriculum. In their class, Diane teaches the history and theory of conservation, while Ezio teaches students how to design and make a fresco, and also how to prepare, design, gild, punch, and paint an individual panel in tempera, all using traditional Renaissance paintings techniques. I'm pleased to share that their seminar will continue to be taught to future cohorts of graduate students, although Diane and Ezio leave us with very large shoes to fill. Since there are two of them, please join me once again in thanking them and wishing them both a healthy and happy retirement. It's now time to turn to today's main event and to the master's candidates who will be presenting their research. Today is your day. Before arriving to the Villa Rosa last January, these students completed a semester of coursework at our main campus in Syracuse, New York. During their subsequent full year of residency here in Florence, they were introduced to the city's most important repositories of books and documents related to Italian Renaissance art, including the extraordinary Berenson Library at Harvard's Itati. Many of their classes were conducted on site in local museums and monuments in front of original masterpieces such as these. They met with a senior archivist at the Archivio dell'Opera del Duomo and learned how to read original documents at the Florentine Archivio di Stato with a local expert in archival research and Renaissance art history. They participated in field trips guided by our faculty members to Pisa, Mantua, and Rome, enjoying a special after-hours visit to the Sistine Chapel. This combination of experiences has informed the choice each student made last spring to define their individual capstone project, the research for which they carried out during the following months. Today, our MA candidates will share the results of their findings in 20-minute presentations that each make an original contribution to the field. The 6 papers you will hear are organized in chronological order according to topic. After the first 3 presentations, those speakers will return to the podium so that audience members who are here at the Villa Rosa can ask questions. There will then be a 20-minute coffee break, after which we will reconvene to hear the last 3 presentations, followed by the opportunity to ask questions of those final speakers. We hope that everyone who is here will then join us for a celebratory reception in the room next door. Our first speaker is Lauren Ashkenazi, presenting Visualizing a French Saint in Italy, Illuminating Evidence on Simone Martini's St. Martin Chapel in Assisi. Lauren.
In the church of the Basilica of San Francesco in Assisi, the mother church of the Franciscan order, there is a chapel dedicated to St. Martin of Tours with a remarkable fresco cycle that depicts notable scenes from the saint's life. The frescoes were completed between 1312 and 1319 by Sienese artist Simone Martini. Cardinal Gentile da Montefiore, a Franciscan friar and cardinal priest of the Church of San Martino ai Monti in Rome, commissioned the narrative cycle to honor his patron saint in the chapel in which he intended to be buried. The St. Martin Chapel's 10 narrative scenes exhibit great originality, given the rarity of depictions of St. Martin's life and Italian art of the period. None of the works that did exist prior to Simone's frescoes, however, appear to have impacted the choice of scenes in the St. Martin Chapel or the ways in which Simone depicted them. Regarding Simone's interpretation, scholars have often noted secular and chivalric elements in 3 of his 10 scenes, namely, St. Martin dividing his cloak for the beggar, the investiture of St. Martin, and St. Martin renounces arms. They've attempted to explain these elements in the context of Simone's association with the French House of Anjou, which ruled the kingdom of Naples from 1280 to 1343 and had political and familial ties to France, Hungary, and to Cardinal Gentile himself. Moreover, Simone's connections to his native Siena, to the convent library at San Francesco, and to the Angevin court may have provided him and any advisors for the chapel's decoration access to a diverse selection of luxurious illuminated manuscripts. Scholars have demonstrated that manuscript illuminations impacted particular elements of other works Simone created around the time of his Assisi frescoes, such as his St. Louis of Toulouse altarpiece and his Maestà fresco, which is often cited as his work most influenced by French Gothic art. No one, however, has adequately explored the impact of manuscript illuminations on Simone's frescoes in Assisi. This study begins by examining the legend of St. Martin as it is reflected in his dedicated chapel, and then compares earlier narrative cycles of St. Martin in France and Italy. It also explores the dissemination of French literature and images during this period, offering new insights into how Simone accessed and adapted elements of manuscript illuminations for his narrative cycle. The study argues that Simone's incorporation of these visual elements helped him to craft an innovative interpretation of the life of St. Martin, while also paying homage to the saint's French background. In doing so, this distinctive depiction of St. Martin's life also reflects the cosmopolitan character of 14th century Italy during the reign of the Angevin kings. The legend of St. Martin is based on a 4th century hagiography written by Sulpicius Severus, a contemporary of the saint. This provided the basis for Jacopo da Voragine's later account of Martin's life within his hagiographic bestseller, The Golden Legend, compiled in the mid-13th century. According to these sources, St. Martin was born in approximately 316 in Pannonia, in an area corresponding to modern Hungary, but grew up in Ticinum, modern-day Pavia. At the age of 15, Martin was forced to serve in the Roman army under the emperors Constantine and Julian. It was during his time as a soldier that Martin enacted his most well-known act of charity. Passing through the city gate of Amiens in France, Martin encountered a half-naked beggar and, feeling pity for him, used his sword to divide his cloak in two, giving the beggar the other half. The next night, Christ appeared to Martin in a dream wearing the half of the cloak he had given to the beggar, indicating that the beggar had been Christ himself. This confirmation of God's kindness prompted Martin to be baptized. When he completed his military service, Martin was ordained an acolyte and eventually went on to become the Bishop of Tours. After Martin's death in 397, his tomb in Tours became one of the most important pilgrimage sites in Europe. Just over a century later, King Clovis I proclaimed Martin patron of the kings and people of the Franks and regarded him as the apostle of Gaul. The St. Martin Chapel's narrative cycle consists of 10 scenes, read from the bottom to top. 4 scenes that depict Martin's secular career fill the bottom tier. The middle tier consists of another 4 scenes of Martin's clerical career and miraculous acts. And the top tier depicts 2 scenes showing Martin's death and glorification. An additional lunette fresco inside the chapel above the entrance shows Cardinal Gentile kneeling before St. Martin. The cycle begins with St. Martin dividing his cloak for the beggar. Simone depicts Martin as a handsome young knight mounted on a white horse in the act of dividing his cloak for the freezing beggar in a tattered robe. The beggar grasps the cloak with one hand, accepting Martin's generosity with gratitude. The next scene, the dream of St. Martin, continues the narrative wherein the following night, Christ, accompanied by several angels, appeared to Martin in a dream wearing the half of the cloak he had given to the beggar. In the following fresco, the investiture of St. Martin, Martin undergoes the investiture ceremony necessary to become a knight. Simone places the scene in an open arcade and fills it with figures who evoke a 14th century court setting. To the left of Martin are 2 falconers and an emperor who girds the saint with a belt and sword. In the center, Martin looks up toward heaven and presses his hands together in prayer. At Martin's feet, a squire fastens his spurs, while behind him, 2 musicians and 3 singers enliven the scene with their colorful costumes and distinctive conical hats. Following the image of the investiture ceremony, Saint Martin renounces arms concludes the scenes depicting Martin's military career. In this episode, Martin transitions from a knight of the Roman emperor to a knight of Christ. Martin, in the center, makes the sign of the cross with his right hand and holds a crucifix in his left. On the grounds of his newfound Christian faith, he renounced his status and has just refused Emperor Julian's offer of money to stay and fight the barbarians. Behind Martin, a fair-haired soldier wears a tall conical hat similar to the one worn by the piper in the previous scene of Martin's investiture. Aside from Voragine's description of Saint Martin as a knight of Christ in the Golden Legend, textual accounts of the saint's life cannot account for the abundance of secular and chivalric motifs present in the frescoes, none of which are explicitly mentioned in these texts or historically appropriate for the period in which Martin lived. Italian and non-Italian illuminated manuscripts that a well-connected figure such as Simone might have had access to may provide clues for his incorporation of these elements into his fresco cycle. Simone's native city of Siena is situated along the Via Francigena, an important medieval pilgrimage and trade route that linked northern Europe and Italy from Canterbury to Rome. The Via Francigena was a conduit not just for the movement of goods and pilgrims, however, but also for the exchange of ideas, objects, and artistic styles. Among these cultural exchanges was the cult of Saint Martin, which travelers on the medieval route helped introduce from France into the Italian peninsula. In France, the earliest surviving narrative cycles of Saint Martin's life appear in the 12th and 13th centuries in the form of stained glass windows, which predominantly highlight his miracles over other aspects of his legend. Aside from the scenes depicting Martin dividing his cloak, the surviving French stained glass cycles differ significantly from Simone's frescoes, whose own style and selection of scenes mark a departure from this artistic tradition. Saint Martin's iconography appeared in Lucca, a Tuscan city on the Via Francigena, at least by the mid-11th century. Lucca's cathedral was dedicated to Saint Martin, and a sculptural program of Martin's life on the cathedral's facade constitutes an important artistic rendering of his legend to exist in Italy prior to Simone's frescoes. Created around the mid-13th century, the stone and marble sculptural program consists of an equestrian group depicting Martin on horseback and the beggar receiving part of his cloak, complemented by 4 carved reliefs representing various miracles attributed to the saint. Of these 4 reliefs, only the miraculous Mass also appears in the St. Martin Chapel, but their compositions are strikingly different. As the cult of Saint Martin spread from France into the Italian peninsula, Simone and his theological advisors could gain more access to depictions of a saint who was otherwise rarely represented in Italian art, thus assisting them in the creation of a new narrative cycle in Assisi. However, Simone's artistic interpretation ultimately does not rely on these precedents. Rather, it draws from images found in the more portable medium of illuminated manuscripts, which travelers on the Via Francigena and figures such as the Angevin kings of Naples helped popularize around the time of Simone's commission in the early 14th century. The House of Anjou's origins trace back to the French monarchy in the 13th century through Louis IX, the Capetian king of France. The language and court culture in Angevin Naples was highly influenced by the family's French background, a factor that distinguished their kingdom through the reign of Robert of Anjou. It was under King Robert's rule that the Neapolitan court most embraced the traditions of both France and Italy, reflected by Robert's political and business relations with Tuscan cities and their merchants, scholars, and artists. Because King Robert had a preference for Tuscan artists, Simone was in an advantageous position to reap the benefits of his patronage and the increasingly cultivated royal court in Naples. French literature had steadily become more common in Italy by the late 11th century, and the Angevins helped facilitate this cultural exchange by importing artifacts to their kingdom, such as illuminated manuscripts. By the late 13th century, manuscript importation into the Italian peninsula developed into manuscript production, and several cities across Italy became important areas for the copying and transmission of French texts, such as Benoit de Saint-Maur's 12th century Romance of Troy and stories from the Arthurian legend. Simone's direct connection to the Angevin royal family is evident in the St. Louis of Toulouse altarpiece, his likely patrons for the work. This connection could have exposed Simone to the Angevins' extensive holdings of books and images, offering him new visual avenues to explore and incorporate in his other works. Moreover, it ensured that his art aligned with both royal and religious tastes, qualities also demonstrated by his frescoes in Assisi. The most popular image of St. Martin's life in medieval representations of the saint was undoubtedly that of him sharing his cloak with a beggar. An illumination of this scene in a late 13th century manuscript from Hainaut is notable for its gilded decorations and portrayal of Martin with the sword and spurs typical of a knight. Though later illuminations vary in their degree of embellishment, details signaling Martin's noble status remain consistent. For instance, the artists often emphasize the luxuriousness of Martin's cloak with white shield-like shapes, which indicate an inner fur lining, sharply contrasting with the beggar's rags that only cover half of his body. Another significant element common to representations of this scene is Martin's horse, which neither Severus nor Voragine mention in their original accounts of this episode. Some of the earliest manuscript images of this scene portray Martin and the beggar both on foot, with minimal distinction between their respective social statuses. By the 12th century, the iconography had evolved to show Martin mounted on a horse, as seen in this miniature from a Bible copied in Spain. Even here, however, Martin lacks any other signifiers of his nobility, and the beggar is quite similar to him in height and appearance. While the presence of Martin's horse is not unique to manuscript illuminations, the iconography is nonetheless perpetuated in French Gothic art as a complement to the saint's increasing adornments that indicate his knightly status. The inclusion of the horse not only emphasizes Martin's elevated social position relative to the lowly beggars, but also transforms him into an archetypal knight of the chivalric age. Simone's portrayal of St. Martin dividing his cloak reflects an awareness of French illuminations of this scene through Martin's curled, golden hair, youthful appearance, and knightly regalia. While far from being a direct copy, Simone also adapts the disparity between Martin and the beggar highlighted in these illuminations to heighten the emotional effect of this charitable act, an aspect less prominent in other interpretations of the period. Ultimately, Simone's fresco serves as an ode to the most well-known and widely disseminated episode for Martin's legend in the French manuscript tradition. Simone's investiture of St. Martin fresco has generated the most discussion in literature on the chapel due to its chivalric subject matter, visual appearance, and the fact that this episode is not mentioned in hagiographies of St. Martin. In her monograph of Simone from 1899, Agnes Goscha briefly discussed an illumination of an investiture ceremony from a mid-14th century northern Italian manuscript of the Romance of Troy, whose iconography is remarkably similar to Simone's fresco, a comparison that deserves further analysis. 3 additional illuminations of investiture ceremonies not mentioned in previous scholarship help to contextualize the courtly nature of Simone's investiture fresco that has troubled scholars for decades. The Romance of Troy is a French poem from the 12th century that reinterprets the Trojan War in an entirely medieval context. This illumination shows the investiture ceremony of Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, who stands on a platform as 2 other figures gird him with a belt and sword and fasten his spurs. He looks toward the sky and holds his hand in front of him as if in prayer, a gesture that Martin mirrors almost exactly in Simone's fresco. Additionally, 2 musicians stand to the left of the scene, recalling the musicians present at Martin's investiture ceremony. In both images, Simone and the illuminator incorporated details that could be found in contemporary court settings, from the colorful clothing to the knightly regalia. Another image of Neoptolemus's investiture ceremony from a northern Italian copy of the Romance of Troy shows him gesturing in this exact same way. Subsequent illuminations show that this specific iconography spread throughout much of the Italian peninsula in the 14th century. These include an investiture ceremony from an Italian copy of a popular French Arthurian legend, and an illumination of a knightly investiture from a manuscript recording the statutes of a chivalric order founded by King Louis I of Naples in 1353. While most of these illuminations likely postdate Simone's work in the St. Martin Chapel, they are evidence of an established iconographic tradition found in Italian copies of French chivalric tales which Simone may have known. A final manuscript illumination from the Hungarian Angevin legendary created in the 1330s helps contextualize contemporary Hungarian elements present in Simone's investiture of St. Martin and St. Martin Renounces Arms frescoes, an understudied but noteworthy aspect of the St. Martin Chapel. The Hungarian Angevin legendary is an expanded version of the Golden Legend consisting entirely of images, and was likely commissioned by a Hungarian member of the House of Anjou. Figures in several illuminations in the manuscript, such as those illustrating the life of St. John the Evangelist, wear a type of hat known as a schuveg. These hats, distinctive for their tall, conical shape and upturned brim, were worn by Hungarian men since the early Middle Ages, regardless of the season, their age, or social class. The piper in Simone's investiture fresco and the soldier in St. Martin Renounces Arms are both shown wearing the schuveg. These figures also exhibit features rarely found in images of contemporary Italians due to their straight blonde hair, fair skin, and light eyes. While Italian art of the 14th century often showed the Virgin Mary with similarly fair features as Simone did in his Maestà, what is unique here is the combination of these specific traits with contemporary Hungarian fashions to portray an ethnic type that alludes to St. Martin's Hungarian background. Consideration of the likely visual precedents for Simone Martini's frescoes in the St. Martin Chapel in Assisi contributes to a more nuanced understanding of the interaction between Italian and foreign, particularly French, artistic traditions. It highlights the artist's exceptional ability to weave various influences into a cohesive and original narrative that was appropriate for a saint whose own Hungarian origins and significance to France reflect a similarly dynamic legacy. While depictions of St. Martin already existed in the Italian peninsula by the 14th century, they remained uncommon. Aided by the extensive manuscript collection in the San Francesco Library at Assisi and the French-inspired court of the Angevins in Naples, Simone and his advisors for the St. Martin Chapel crafted a novel and compelling narrative cycle that captures the diverse atmosphere of religious and secular life in Italy. Simone's innovative use of elements likely borrowed from French illuminated manuscripts, which became increasingly available in Italy as they spread along the Via Francigena and were subsequently copied in local cities, resulted in a remarkable interpretation of Martin's legend. This interpretation not only stands out in 14th century Italian art, but also redefines the boundaries of artistic creativity and cross-cultural exchange during this period. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Our next speaker is Caitlin Carr, presenting Sculpting the Sculptor, celebrating a corporate identity in Nanni Di Banco's Stoneworkers Relief at Or San Michele. Caitlin.
Nanni Di Banco's four-crowned martyrs tabernacle, begun in circa 1409 and completed by 1417, houses four Stoic sculptures on the north face of the church of Or San Michele. Beneath them, a relief shows four contemporary sculptors and stoneworkers using tools and materials typically found in Italian stone and woodworking workshops during the early modern period. Though smaller in scale than the sculptural ensemble above them, the impact of Nanni Stoneworkers relief is just as monumental. It celebrated the members of the Stone and Woodworkers Guild, who were responsible for decorating the niche, and their professional activities. Through the stoneworkers' relief, the Guild communicated a corporate identity to the wider Florentine public by depicting a few laborers carrying out a limited range of tasks to represent the collective guild. Whereas other guilds assigned niches at Or San Michele relied upon images of their patron saint or emblematic stemi to embody their profession, Nani stoneworkers called attention to the members of the Stone and Woodworkers Guild themselves. The relief also alluded to the Four Crowned Martyrs, a group of 4th century Christian sculptors who were martyred because they refused to carve a pagan god statue for the Roman emperor. At the same time, it curated an idealized image of the guild by selecting elements typically included in representations of these saints and combining them with details such as contemporary dress and tasks, thereby identifying these figures as artisans who were representative of the Florentine Stone and Woodworkers Guild. This study suggests that the overlapping identities of the figures within the stoneworkers' relief stems from an intentional effort on behalf of Nani and the guild members to celebrate themselves and their profession on a public monument. Scholarship on Nani stoneworkers typically supplements larger discussions of the Four Crowned Martyrs niche or Nani di Banco's career. Some scholars highlight the relief as an illustration of the legend of the Four Crowned Martyrs. Others have suggested that the 4 men at work in the relief represent both the Four Crowned Martyrs and the guild members, but even this interpretation fails to fully address the corporate identity presented in the relief. A persistent desire to identify the likenesses of Nani or his father Antonio in the Four Crowned Martyrs sculptural ensemble above has obscured the relief's function as an idealized representation of the Stone and Woodworkers Guild. This study posits that Nani, perhaps together with advisors, carefully selected which tasks were depicted to create a composite image of the guild on a prominent Florentine landmark. In addition to Florence's stone and woodworkers, the Church of Or San Michele was an important site for all Florentine guilds. It functioned as the city's granary before being converted to a church that housed a miraculous image of the Madonna. In the 14th century, niches were added to the exterior and assigned to the city's guilds. Each guild was responsible for constructing a tabernacle and adorning it with the representation of their patron saint. In so doing, the tabernacles became spaces for each guild to advertise their public identity. The Stone and Woodworker Guild's tabernacle of the Four Crowned Martyrs, patron saints of their profession, adorns the northern exterior wall of Or San Michele. The tabernacle consists of 3 main parts: the relief of stoneworkers at the bottom, the niche that holds the monumental sculpted figures of the 4 early Christian saints, and the pediment at the top that contains an image of Christ in high relief. The relief is flanked by shields decorated with the image of an axe, the stemma or coat of arms of the Stone and Woodworkers Guild. The workshop is cleverly framed with depictions of various additional tools that the guild members used to create their projects. On the left, a vertical measuring stick is accompanied by a chest below it. These objects balance the carpenter square in the upper right-hand corner and the wooden seat in the lower right corner. Based on their facial hair and body types, the 4 men appear to be middle-aged. Thus, they are well past their apprenticeship and have years of working experience. The 3rd man from the left, who has a longer beard and drooping eyelids, seems to be even older. From left to right, a wall builder with a short beard, dressed in a vesta gown, cap, boots, and a work apron, constructs a wall using cut stone and a mortar trowel. Behind the wall in progress, a plumb level, used to ensure that horizontal surfaces were level, hangs on the wall. The next figure, a stonecutter, uses a pump drill to carve a portion of a spiral column resting on a work table that is supported by a pair of sawhorses. Behind him hangs a compass, which was used to measure and determine proportions. The next man at work, with his long beard and loose-fitting cap, is another stonecutter. Seated, he measures an inverted column capital with a carpenter square and a compass. Between the capital carver and the 4th figure is a small chest, upon which a metal-headed mallet and punches rest. The final artisan depicted is a sculptor, who wields a sculptor's pick as he works on what appears to be a wingless nude puto. Notably, the image of the Stone and Woodworkers Guild promoted by the Stoneworkers Relief only includes stoneworkers. There are no woodworkers. The stem on either side of the relief show an axe known as an asha, a tool used by carpenters to cut and rough wood panels. We can also see the stemma with the asha in the tondo above the tabernacle, created by Luca della Robbia a few decades later. While woodworking is not one of the tasks depicted within the relief, the stemma flanking the relief evokes the work of a carpenter rather than a stoneworker. The asha has been ascribed different functions by various scholars, but as other depictions of this instrument are directly related to woodworking, I believe this particular instrument would have been used for carpentry rather than mixing mortar or refining stones in the early 15th century. Above these stoneworkers stand the aforementioned four-crowned martyrs, a most appropriate subject to represent the Stone and Woodworkers Guild. Here we can see the sculpture group inside the Museum of Or San Michele, on the upper floor where many of the original sculptures from the exterior tabernacles are displayed. The four-crowned martyrs we see inside the niche today are copies, but the decorated tabernacle itself, including the relief, is original. These early Christian figures were a group of sculptors working for the Emperor Diocletian in the 4th century. Their belief in Christ gave them the ability to carve porphyry, a stone so hard that it broke the tools of all the non-Christian sculptors, and they gained Diocletian's favor with their skillful works. The emperor requested that they carve a statue of a pagan god for him, but they refused because of their faith. Consequently, Diocletian ordered them to be sealed in lead coffins and thrown in the river. The four-crowned martyrs rarely appear in Florentine art, but they were commonly associated with stonemasonry guilds in Italy and other parts of Europe. To properly contextualize Nani's stoneworkers' relief, it is crucial to consider the particular nature of the guild for which it was created. Early 15th century Florence had 21 guilds that each contributed their specialized skill or craft to society. They protected their commercial interests by regulating professional practices, overseeing members, and ensuring high-quality production. The largest of these guilds was the Stone and Woodworkers Guild. Safeguarding the interests of any form of labor associated with building, construction, or sculpture, the guild employed wallers, stonemasons, and sculptors like the ones depicted in Nani's relief. It also included carpenters who were involved with construction, and while they are not represented in Nani's relief, their presence is signaled by the axe on the stemma of the guild. Though unseen in the relief, other professions such as quarriers, roofers, carters of stone and dirt, and cesspool diggers were also constituents of this guild. An important aspect of Florentine guild culture was the ability it offered artisans to practice numerous crafts by allowing them to matriculate into multiple guilds. This was common in the Stone and Woodworkers Guild, as some of its members joined other guilds associated with related industries, such as woodworkers who enrolled in both the Carpenters Guild and Stone and Woodworkers Guild. This flexible guild membership was uncommon in other Italian cities, where specific regulations restricted cross-guild membership. Therefore, it was strategically decided what technical crafting processes and figures best represented the guild's collective identity. The absence of some guild roles suggests the higher status of sculptors and stonecutters within the association. The relief also continues the tradition of depicting the four-crowned martyrs as working in stone rather than wood or performing other tasks. However, including the Waller innovated a way to maintain the convention of stoneworking associated with the four-crowned martyrs, while adapting their legend to better match the distinctive identity of the Florentine Stone and Woodworkers Guild. Examining Nani's four-crowned martyrs in relation to other works at Or San Michele reveals distinct approaches to depicting patron saints and the guilds they represent. Though the four-crowned martyrs are depicted within the niche in a style inspired by ancient Roman statues, the stoneworkers in the relief uniquely depict a contemporary waller, stonecutters, and sculptor. The four figures refer to the sculpture group above by the number of figures and their profession, but their 15th century dress distinguishes them from the classical garments of the sculpture group. These overlapping identities allow the figures in the relief to allude to the four-crowned martyrs, while also representing the everyday Florentine craftsmen who belong to the Stone and Woodworkers Guild. Whether or not viewers saw the four figures in the relief as being the same as the four sculptures in the niche above, Florentines passing by or San Michele saw in the Stone and Woodworkers Guild tabernacle a relief that deliberately echoed the professions of some of the guild's members. In contrast, other tabernacle reliefs at the church illustrate episodes from the lives of the saints whose statues stand above them. In particular, Nani di Fanto's own Miracle of the Severed Hoof beneath the St. Eligius on the west facade of Or San Michele, which celebrates the Blacksmiths Guild, follows this design. The St. Eligius and Four Crowned Martyrs tabernacles have similar organizations. The Blessing Christ in the gable relief, the patron saints in the niche, and a workshop scene in the relief. In the lower relief of St. Eligius, the Miracle of the Severed Hoof conflates multiple episodes in the saint's life in a continuous narrative set in a blacksmith's workshop. The scene is filled with 3 people and 1 horse. Instruments one might expect to find in such a workshop are included, such as bellows and a forge on the left side, and a collection of small tools such as tongs and horseshoes hanging on the wall. The blacksmith, St. Eligius, performs a miracle he learned from Christ. He attaches a horseshoe to a disembodied horse hoof, completely separated from the horse's body. Meanwhile, a woman, with horns marking her as a demon trying to tempt Eligius, watches and holds rods in front of her face. In the legend, Eligius forced her out of the workshop with a hot iron and subsequently gained the ability to hold hot irons without burning himself. The inclusion of significant details, such as the demon and the horse with the detached hoof, inform the viewer that the pictured blacksmith is St. Eligius. Though the Miracle of the Severed Hoof shows an episode from the saint's life, Nani's Stoneworkers relief simultaneously references the profession associated with both the saints in question and the guild members, and therefore could be interpreted as either. To better understand the significance of mixing contemporary artisans in the relief and classically dressed sculptures in the niche to form a whole monument dedicated to the 4 crowned martyrs, we must examine other sculpted depictions of these saints. Representing the 4 crowned martyrs in sculpture was significant for stoneworkers because this medium directly connected them to their patron saints via their shared profession. In the early 15th century, the main source of the story of the 4 crowned martyrs was the popular golden legend, Jacopo da Voragine's 13th century compilation of the lives of the saints, that were arranged according to the liturgical year and aimed to encourage religious devotion. The tale recounted in the Golden Legend derives from the more extensive Passion of the 4 Crowned Martyrs by Porphyrius in the 11th century, which records the life and martyrdom of the sculptor martyrs. This passion provides more details about the specific works the sculptors created before their martyrdom, and specifies that the martyrs carved columns, capitals, and figural sculptures such as cupids. Interestingly, non-historical relief depicts many of the same tasks, suggesting that this text may have been known to the Florentine Stone and Woodworkers Guild. However, this text does not describe the sculptor martyrs working as wallers, yet Nani and his collaborators include a waller. With the other tasks clearly recorded, the inclusion of a waller within the relief, if he was not part of the original legend or visual tradition, merits further inquiry. The waller is a distinct feature of this representation of the 4 crowned martyrs, absent from other sculptures of the saints created in Italy from the late 14th to early 15th century. As we can see in examples from Venice, Pavia, and Bergamo, depictions of the 4 crowned martyrs all similarly show a group of 4 stoneworkers carving columns, capitals, or figural sculptures with tools such as chisels, hammers, and compasses, much like the relief at Or San Michele. However, including the waller, as well as contemporary working clothes and a shared continuous setting, further distinguishes Nani's stoneworkers relief. The portico of the Doge's Palace in Venice consists of a series of columns with decorated capitals, one of which contains the 4 crowned martyrs, who are clearly identifiable by their crowns and activities. Though they occupy the same capital, they are presented on separate faces, isolating them from each other. They use tools that were used in the workshop to create columns and decorative sculptures, just as the relief at Or San Michele did decades later. However, their fashion is more elegant than that of the artisans in the Florentine relief. They wear mantles with fine detailing around the neckline, the cuffs of their sleeves, and the hemline, in addition to their crowns. Similarly, the four crowned martyrs also appear on the Ark of St. Augustine in Pavia. Within this sculpture, which is densely populated with numerous saints, the martyrs can be located on the upper piers of the second level. Each isolated sculptor martyr is similarly dressed in garments with ornamented necklines, cuffs, and hemlines, but the square outline of an apron can be seen over their skirts. All four are seated and perform some aspect of creating a column. For example, one hammers a chisel to create the base of a column, while another, measuring with a compass, holds a scroll with an inscription confirming these men are the four crowned martyrs. The tool-bearing four crowned martyrs also appear on the portico of the White Lions of the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Bergamo. A frieze comprised of niches that each contain a figure decorates the upper portion of the porch. The eastern side depicts four sculptors with inscriptions that identify them as the four crowned martyrs. Like Nani stoneworkers, these figures wear contemporary dress and headwear, but they lack work aprons. The background of each niche is ornately decorated with sculpted flowers and a scalloped half dome, clearly not the bottega scene depicted in the Florentine relief. All four depictions of the four crowned martyrs engage in similar stoneworking processes such as carving columns or assessing their work with measuring instruments. Unlike Nani's relief, however, they wear clothing that is appropriate for their contemporary period, but it is hardly suitable for the intensive labor involved in carving stone. Furthermore, the shared continuous space of Nani's stoneworkers' relief, in contrast with the Venice, Pavia, and Bergamo examples, connects these stoneworking tasks visually. All of these depictions of the four crowned martyrs were publicly visible in their respective cities, but only Nani's relief is so explicitly linked to the Stone and Woodworkers Guild that commissioned and created it. The incorporation of these distinctive details marked this relief as a visualization of the collective identity of the Guild. Most notably, Nani's stoneworkers' relief includes the Waller, a figure that was not reflected in the original legend of the four crowned martyrs. The relief subsequently featured a prominent profession within the Guild, which exemplified the unique flexibility of the Florentine Guild system. Because the Waller worked in stone like the sculptor martyrs, they could incorporate him into the relief without defying the hagiographic narrative, which they would have done had they included professions like carters or cesspool diggers that are entirely unmentioned. The inclusion of a Waller within the Florentine stoneworkers' relief emphasizes its function as an image tailored to, for, and by the Stone and Woodworkers Guild. This suggests that the Guild intentionally represented its own members, encouraging viewers to interpret the relief as showing members of the Guild itself at work. Nani and his guildsmen represented themselves by portraying four stoneworkers laboring within the context of the Stone and Woodworkers Tabernacle at Orsan Michele. They reinterpreted the traditional iconography of the four crowned martyrs by incorporating a shared setting akin to that of a workshop, contemporary clothing appropriate for physical labor, and stoneworking processes to emphasize the stoneworkers of the very guild it represented. Nani's stoneworkers' relief marks a new way artisans portrayed themselves and their profession in monumental sculpture, as it directly evokes the identity of the corporation of the Stone and Woodworkers Guild, the specialized skills they contributed to the city of Florence, and the individual guild members themselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Our next speaker is Eli Mehdi, presenting Images of the Enemy in 16th Century Tuscany, the Terracotta Muslims at San Vivaldo's New Jerusalem. Eli.
In the year 1500, on the 1st of May, friars of the Franciscan order moved into a plot of woodland about 30 miles to the southwest of Florence. This land was known as San Vivaldo. As soon as they acquired this land, the friars began a program of construction that transformed San Vivaldo into a new Jerusalem. 34 chapels were built, which emulated the devotional sites of the Holy Land. Leading families of Florence all supplied funding for the construction of the complex, and with their help, it was completed by 1516. Each chapel at San Vivaldo contained colourful sets of terracotta sculptures, a collaboration between Florentine workshops. The decorative programme as a whole was led by the well-known Della Robbia family, while other sculptors, such as Agnolo di Polo and Benedetto Buglioni, worked on individual groups. Each of these sculpture groups illustrates scenes from the life of Christ. Today, only 17 of the original 34 chapels survive, with at least one sculpture group remaining in each chapel. This presentation will focus on just one, the chapel of the House of Annas, home to the image of Christ before Annas, attributed to Benedetto Buglioni. In this sculpture group, it is possible to identify figures with distinctive features. These figures are consistently shown with darker skin tones, Eastern-style headgear, and even what appears to be a direct reference to the Turkish Ottoman Empire, a crescent moon banner. It is possible to view these details in other chapels, but here in Christ before Annas, they are most strongly concentrated. These figures all either engage in acts of aggression towards Christ or are complacent in his suffering. Today, I address the presence of these figures for the first time. Furthermore, I propose an answer to an important question. Why include allusions to an Eastern enemy in the narrative programme of a Western Christian site? To do so, we must look at the context surrounding San Vivaldo's creation. On the 1st of June, 1500, exactly 1 month after the friars settled in San Vivaldo, Pope Alexander VI declared a crusade against the Ottoman Empire. Jerusalem, the place of the life and death of Christ, was considered the most significant site for Christian pilgrimage. However, with rising hostile Ottoman presence in the Mediterranean, the road from Europe to Jerusalem had become more dangerous than ever before. Therefore, would-be pilgrims turned to local copies of the Holy Land, such as San Vivaldo in Tuscany, to direct their devotions. San Vivaldo is the second example of a Holy Mount complex in Europe, named after its emulation of the hills of Jerusalem. It followed by only a decade its more famous counterpart, the Holy Mount of Varallo in Piedmont, also a Franciscan site. Jerusalem was of particular spiritual significance to the Franciscan order, who, from the year 1342, were keepers of the Latin Quarter of Jerusalem and were responsible for facilitating pilgrimage to it. Like Varallo in the 1490s, San Vivaldo quickly became a pilgrimage site of its own. In 1516, Pope Leo X even granted indulgences, time of purgatory, of up to 7 years to those who had visited the complex, the same reward as if the pilgrim had visited Jerusalem itself. Architectural copies of Jerusalem were already common across the West since the Middle Ages, but the Holy Mounts of San Vivaldo and Varallo marked an important shift in this tradition. Instead of representing Jerusalem in a single structure, these were larger complexes, which recreated the Holy Land as a whole. It is important to note that the chapels at San Vivaldo were not exact replicas of their Holy Land originals, but symbolic structures arranged to guide pilgrims along a streamlined Via Dolorosa, or Way of Suffering route, which followed Christ's own footsteps in the Holy Land. As the House of Annas was the second stop in San Vivaldo's Way of Suffering, this image of Christ before Annas would have introduced pilgrims to the iconography of the enemy of Christ, the Ottoman Muslim, at San Vivaldo. As opposed to the other groups, this image contains the highest concentration of depictions of the other. In Christ before Annas, as with many of the sculpture groups at San Vivaldo, a foreground of terracotta sculpture is paired with a background of fresco painting. This sculpture group depicts the presentation of Christ before the Jewish high priest Annas in 12 terracotta figures. This was one of the first key events during the Passion of Christ after his betrayal by Judas and his arrest in the garden, in which he was put on trial. With blonde hair, pale skin, and robes of a regal reddish purple, Christ is the most visually striking figure from his place in the center foreground. He turns to the viewer's right, directly facing the figure of Annas, who is seated on the far right of the frame upon a throne that is modeled in relief and painted to imitate stone. In this image, Christ is being questioned by Annas about his followers and the content of his preaching. Soldiers and onlookers crowd him suffocatingly within the composition. His knees are bent in an attempt to stabilize himself, as a soldier in red and yellow has his hands placed on his arm and shoulder as though to push him. As recounted in the book of John, Christ responded to Annas with a question of his own. "Why do you question me? Question those who heard what I told them. Look, they know what I said." In response to Jesus, a soldier of Annas struck his face, indicated by the soldier in blue who holds his hand aloft threateningly. The other 8 terracotta figures stand around Christ. They all wear some form of distinctive headgear, and they crowd the composition, peering over one another's shoulders in order to look at Christ. The large crowd is continued in the fresco background, which depicts a group of heads with weapons, torches, and banners raised. The central banner is emblazoned with a distinct symbol. As I mentioned, a yellow-red crescent moon, which stands out against the white of the fabric around it. For most of these figures, only their heads are visible and their range of headgear is striking. Throughout the San Vivaldo program as a whole, only the tormentors of Christ wear exotic headgear, while Christ and his apostles wear no form of headdress at all. For example, John the Evangelist is the only noticeable figure in this group without anything on his head except for a halo. Headgear was, therefore, a consistent sign, visually, of moral iniquity at San Vivaldo. To the average viewer, the fact that the mob in Christ Before Annas wore this range of headgear, foreign headgear in the first place, was enough to identify them as the other, even if they could not personally distinguish between individual types of headdress. Through an analysis of this headgear and the facial features of the ensemble around Christ, it is possible to identify them as, specifically, Ottoman Muslims. For example, the man upon the balustrade in the far right background wears a white turban wrapped with a horizontal tuck under a predominant vertical fold. His appearance and the turban he wears indicates firmly that this was a Muslim Turk, as clothing regulations in the Ottoman Empire from 1453 onwards were very strict, separating religious groups according to color of dress. For example, Jews wore yellow, Christians wore blue, and according to an ambassador to the Ottoman Empire in the 1550s, only the Turks wear white turbans. Although officials of the Arab Mamluk Empire were also known to don white turbans, as all Muslims were expected to wear this color, the Ottoman turban had its own distinct style, as did the Mamluk turban. Ottoman turbans were typically wrapped around a red cap known as a taj, though the taj was not always necessarily visible. By contrast, the Mamluks wrapped their headgear with a vertical thrust as opposed to horizontal, and there was no taj or distinct singular fold in the center of the turban. Art in Tuscany from around the year 1500 indicates that the differences between Ottoman and Mamluk turbans were known during this time. For example, Filippino Lippi's frescoes for the Strozzi Chapel in Santa Maria Novella exemplify the Florentine perception of Mamluks, who had sent an embassy to Florence in 1487. They wear turbans that are large, multicolored, and vertically wrapped. By contrast, his frescoes for the Carafa Chapel in Rome depict a figure wearing a very different style of turban. This example shows a simple white turban with a horizontal thrust, like at San Vivaldo, wrapped around a red taj in the manner of the Ottoman Empire. Similarly, the carrying of the cross by Biagio d'Antonio contains another figure wearing the same white, horizontally wrapped headgear with a taj. These examples establish that Tuscan artists were interested in visualizing Ottomans during this time, and that they were able to differentiate between them and Mamluks. Turbans also played a more general role in the visual arts, evoking the image of the distant other. Though proximally far away from the viewer in Christ Before Annas, the Ottoman is still present and still overlooks the scene. This detail reminded the viewer that the Ottoman Empire remained a present threat to Christ and his followers. The inclusion of the small figure of the Ottoman in the background of Christ before Annas allows the viewer to recognize the less direct references to the Ottoman Empire in the rest of the image. For example, the range of foreign headgear in the terracotta group surrounding Christ bears a close resemblance to military hats worn by the Ottomans during this period. For example, the terracotta figure in the front left wears a conical helmet with ear flaps, similar to the type worn by Ottoman janissaries during this time, the zırhkular helmet. Here you can see the janissaries to the right in this detail of an Ottoman manuscript illustration from this time, all wearing this form of headgear. Additionally, examples of şarbuş hats may be identified in the group in the middle ground of the fresco, most clearly in the figure with the orange and purple headgear. This was a vertical military cap with a triangular base, a triangular shape, sometimes with a turban wrapped around the base. As the şarbuş was banned in the Mamluk Empire in the 14th century, likely due to its Turkish origins, it became associated more closely with the Ottoman Empire during this period. The image at San Vivaldo represents a rare example of these types of headgear in Tuscan art. Military skirmishes were one of the primary modes of interaction with the Ottoman Empire during this time, and so it is plausible that knowledge of these headdresses would have been gained from the battlefield. Furthermore, these figures are identifiable as Ottomans when considered alongside the banner that they hold aloft, the most explicit reference to the Turk in this sculpture group. This banner bears the symbol of a crescent moon, and such banners with this symbol of Islam were often carried by defenders of the Ottoman Empire into battle. Combined with specific headgear in Christ before Annas, the image of the crescent at San Vivaldo is therefore both a direct reference to the Ottoman Empire and to their military aggression, enforced by its presence among raised weapons. As well as headgear, particular facial features and darker skin tones contribute to the iconography of the Ottoman at San Vivaldo. Christ's aggressors at San Vivaldo are recurringly depicted with more prominent and deformed facial features. Paul Kaplan states that long aquiline noses of shapes far from the classical ideal constituted a significant aspect of the contemporary European image of the Turk. This motif appears in Tuscan art, notably in Biagio's Ottoman in his carrying of the cross. Furthermore, it was typical during this time to distinguish Ottomans by their manner of facial hair, a crucial way of signifying identity in the Muslim empires. Kaplan notes that in Venetian contexts, Ottomans were usually depicted with drooping moustaches, and they typically sported beards where their Mamluk counterparts did not. This observation also applies to Tuscan examples, with this type of facial hair visible in both Biagio's altarpiece and in the figures of San Vivaldo's Christ before Annas. Furthermore, different skin tones are employed in San Vivaldo to distinguish between Christ and his Ottoman tormentors. Christ stands with blonde hair and light skin, and the Jewish priest Annas sits to the right with a similarly pale complexion, but they are surrounded in notable contrast by brown-skinned figures. We can also see black-skinned figures in other sculptural groups at San Vivaldo. The Ottoman Empire was often conflated with blackness during this time, partially due to the long-running association between Islam and dark skin, and in other parts due to an awareness of African slavery within the empire. Although Africans formed only a small proportion of Ottoman slaves, the image of the Black Turk signaled the otherness of the Ottoman Empire, or even perhaps the role of African slavery in the Ottoman court, as it was commonly thought that the sultans were born to enslaved mothers. There was a well-established tradition in medieval and early modern religious scenes, especially those depicting the lives of the saints and the Passion of Christ, of including the other in aggressive roles. For example, in this painting by Mantegna, the aggressors of Christ are depicted as Jews. The man to the left of the image wears a headband with pseudo-Hebrew written on it, and the old woman to the right wears a yellow turban. Meanwhile, an example of Muslims in religious scenes may be identified in Sassetta's Trial by Fire, painted for the Church of St. Francis in San Sepolcro, a Tuscan town named after the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Here, St. Francis is depicted during his disputation with the Egyptian Sultan in the early 13th century, alongside Muslim figures of both light and dark skin. In Christ before Annas at San Vivaldo, Ottomans substitute Jews, and the generic Muslim other, as a result of growing anxiety about Ottoman expansion into the Christian world. Islamic powers had imposed heavy constraints on pilgrimage to the Holy Land from Europe, even before 1500. While Jerusalem was under Mamluk rule from 1260 to 1517, Muslims pervaded Christian holy sites and often interfered with the path of Christian pilgrims, even with a Franciscan guide to act as mediator. In 1517, the year after the friars completed construction and decoration of San Vivaldo, Mamluk Jerusalem was conquered by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans imposed harsher restrictions on the Christians in the Holy Land than the Mamluks did. For example, on the 18th of March, 1523, Franciscan friars were evicted from Mount Zion and the Christian holy places of David's tomb and the site of the Last Supper, which were converted into a mosque. Of course, by contrast, San Vivaldo had none of these complications. While visitors there encountered the East virtually in this New Jerusalem in the form of terracotta Muslims, the site's Franciscan friars controlled the role that such figures played. In San Vivaldo, the message was plain. The Muslim, subjugated here within the decorative program, was clearly delineated as the enemy of Christ. The turn of the century, the period in which the friars settled in San Vivaldo, brought with it increased tension between East and West. This was the context in which San Vivaldo was created to serve as a spiritual replacement for Jerusalem. A consistent struggle against Ottoman conquest in Eastern Europe marked the years leading up to San Vivaldo's construction, and a crusade conference even took place in Rome in 1500 between various powers to discuss this pressing issue. Crusader rhetoric became increasingly popular once again, and beyond this, military resistance against the Turks. Beyond the matter of military tension between East and West, a crucial theological dimension continued to underscore negative perceptions of the Muslim since the Middle Ages. In the papal bull commencing this crusade, Pope Alexander VI described the Ottomans as great and savage persecutors of Christ worshippers, the most treacherous Turks, enemies of the name of Christ. In San Vivaldo, the Ottomans are depicted in alignment with the Pope's contemporary description as enemies of Christ. Furthermore, the writings of the diarist Luca Landucci also illustrate how anxiety towards the Ottoman Empire's expansion was felt, this time in Florence. On the 13th of April, 1481, he noted that several Florentine churches, including the Franciscan Basilica of Santa Croce, organized fundraising for the war effort against the Ottomans, promising indulgences for those who contributed. Meanwhile, the Franciscan friar, Paul Walter, who was stationed in Jerusalem between 1482 and 83, referred passionately to the Ottomans as those dogs and enemies of the sacrament. This belief that Muslims were the enemy of Christ is evident in Christ before Annas at San Vivaldo. If the pilgrim was not already familiar with the scene portrayed, their Franciscan guide would likely have served the role of interpreter. In this image, in which an ensemble of Ottomans is paired with this key moment from the trial of Christ before Annas, Muslims are clearly identified as heretics, those who had known Christ and his message, yet still turned away from him. In this way, contemporary beliefs and anxieties surrounding the Islamic world were articulated in San Vivaldo. Overall, in the context of relocating Jerusalem into Tuscany during a time of increased tension with the Islamic East, I have posited that particular figures within the decorative program of San Vivaldo are representations of Ottoman Muslims. By recognizing these figures as hostile towards Christ and his followers within the sculptural program, the friars of San Vivaldo asserted their belief in their rightful control over the Holy Land. Thank you.
Thank you, Eli. If I could ask Lauren and Caitlin to maybe turn on the back of the house lights. Quella destra, esatto, okay. We now have the opportunity for all of you to ask questions of the students who just presented the 3 presentations you've heard on the Chapel of St. Martin in Assisi, on Nani DeBanco's Stoneworkers Relief, and on the the terracotta Muslims at San Vivaldo. My colleague Jonathan Nelson has a wireless microphone, which is coming to life as we witness. And if you just raise your hand, he will bring the microphone to you so you can ask a question.
Thank you. First of all, fantastic presentations. Deeply enjoyed all of them. My question is for Caitlin. I was wondering, I am not a Florentine scholar and I have never looked at this period, but in your opinion, what is the reason for Nani di Banco using the particular emblem of a woodworker in the Stoneworkers Guild? I wondered if you had any more information on that. Thank you.
So thinking about the symbol of the axe of woodworkers as the symbol of the Stone and Woodworkers Guild, this is certainly a question I've been asking myself for many months because the stemma predates Nani's involvement in the guild by many years. So trying to unravel why an axe is the symbol of the guild has been my personal mission. And while I can't ask any of them myself, the conclusion that I am entertaining thus far has been that axes were used earlier, perhaps hundreds of years earlier, to carve stone, but over time technology became much more advanced, and by the time you're using hammers and chisels, axes were far less accurate and more difficult to use than a hammer and chisel, which would be a more adequate symbol of the stone workers. But thank you.
This is for Lauren. Thank you for that presentation. I'm going to Assisi on Monday, so it's just perfect for me.
Wonderful.
And just 2 things. 1, did Simone Martini physically go to Naples? And 2, what about, I think he went to Avignon as well. Could
Yeah.
you say something about that?
Yeah, 2 great questions. The first one was regarding if Simone Martini went to Naples. And that's a great question that a lot of people have asked because we're actually not really sure. There's not a lot of documentation on Simone Martini, unfortunately, and the documentation that there is, we do know that he goes to Avignon later in his life, and this is in the 1340s, I want to say, but either way, the final decades of his life, he's in Avignon. Whether he went to Naples or not, we're not sure. It's definitely possible that he was in the Angevin court. He would have been in the Castle Nuovo in Naples, but if he didn't, regardless, we know that the connection between the Angevins and Simone is represented in the St. Louis of Toulouse altarpiece, and that could have been executed in Siena or wherever, maybe not necessarily Naples, but to answer your question, we're not really sure.
This question is to Eli. I did enjoy thoroughly her presentation and the way she was presenting, also her performance. And the rest were great, all enjoyable. Also, the material was rich enough, like to get us through, to get to the core of the subject. To me, I would like really to know now spectators who are going to watch these things in San Vivaldo, or I don't want them to make
San
mistake.
Vivaldo, you said
All
it
right.
correctly. Thank you.
So are they getting the same impression, like what is depicted there and the message intended to be conveyed about the image about Muslims, their aggressive attitude towards Jesus Christ? Because nowadays it's completely different. Nowadays, the Holy Quran or the Holy Books of Muslims is read everywhere and in many languages. And there are lots of chapters, lots of material about Jesus Christ in particular, and Prophet Musa and all prophets acknowledging that Muslims should believe in all prophets and glorify them, probably not in the same way as the Christians are doing, but we glorify them greatly. And we say words we use specific words in reference to them as a symbol of glory. We don't mention their names, just bare names, those prophets, and particularly, and they married the Virgin. We have lots of materials. Some of the Christian natives from the Middle East countries, they were saying we learn about Mary the Virgin more in the Quran, more than we do in the Bible. So I would like to know, are people now getting the same impression when they are watching all this, or they have awareness at the moment?
Thank you for your question. So the question of the perspective shift between people at the time in the year 1500 and people nowadays has been something that we've explored with Professor Bourne quite a lot this year. And it's something that has been on my mind a lot while researching this project, because part of this was trying to understand how the contemporary Florentine would have perceived the terracotta Muslims at San Vivaldo and what they would have understood. Nowadays, these figures, sometimes it's easy to overlook them because they relate to a lot of contemporary perceptions of the Muslim at the time. And other times they can appear quite shocking and problematic to the modern viewer. At the time, there was a lot of misunderstanding between both spheres of the world. And this manifested at the time in a way that probably in most cases would not be seen as acceptable or even true to the modern day viewer. So thank you for your question. That is certainly a very good point that you raised.
Yeah, a question for Eli, a couple of questions for Eli. You were investigating at all any correlation between Piero's flagellation and also Sigismundo and the Piccolomini Pope's attempt to stop the encroachment of the Ottomans into Constantinople? All this is going on at that time. Did you research that anymore? And the other question is, have you been to Sacramento de Varallo, on which all of this is based? And are these the same artisans, by the way?
Thank you very much for your questions. So the second question, alas, no, I have not been to Varallo, but I did get a very special opportunity to visit San Vivaldo. I do not believe that these were the same artists or artisans because at the time they were being built simultaneously. So the artisans at San Vivaldo were predominantly workshops from Florence, such as the Della Robbia, Benedetto Boglioni, and Agnolo di Polo.
What year is it again that they're building that in Vivaldo?
Between 1500 and 1516. Yes. Thank you for your questions.
Last question, anyone?
Eli, what is the one in Piedmont? Is it the same decoration that has that amazing high relief and then painting behind it?
I'm very sorry. Could you please repeat that?
The Varallo, does it have the
Yes.
same technique of a sculpture and then, that's cool.
Yes, it's amazing in Varallo. It's mostly later sculptures and terracotta frescoes, but in a very similar manner, the pilgrim was able to immerse themselves in the scenes going on around them. I absolutely recommend you visit.
Okay, so before we pause for a 20-minute coffee break, if we could just give a warm round of applause to our first three presenters. Thank you. So those of you who are here, please join us for coffee, tea, cookies, and we'll resume in 20 minutes. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everyone. We are now ready for part two of our program, and our first speaker is Annika Reynolds. speaking on experiencing an enfilade, curated views and all'antica architecture at Villa della Torre in Fumane. Annika.
Located just outside of Verone, in the town of Fumane, Villa della Torre stands out among its 16th century counterparts for its deliberate modification of all Antica or classical Roman villa design. This presentation will focus on the villa's enfilade, an architectural feature that the della Torre family included in their renovations to the villa in the 1530s and 40s. The enfilade is the path from the villa's entrance to its rear, which creates a linear route framed by parallel stone portals. Ultimately, by means of this path, the enfilade guides the visitor towards a view of the villa's garden and the landscape beyond it. I argue that Villa della Torre's enfilade, a feature borrowed from ancient villas, offers the visitor a unique experience of nature and architecture that reflects the della Torre family's cultural background and intellectual interests. Driven by the artistic and intellectual pursuits of the family's patriarch, Giulio, the della Torre reimagined views of nature and curated the visitor's experience through their villa's enfilade. In the following slides, we'll walk through the villa together to orient ourselves to the site. Although the 21st century to the villa experiences a space altered from its 16th century appearance, modern plans and photographs can help us make a reliable reconstruction of the original space and its setting on a verdant, slightly inclined hill in Fumane. We can see that today's entrance into the villa complex begins with 4 semicircular stairs. After passing through a gated stone portal, one descends another set of semicircular stairs to stand in the pathway in the center of an upper garden. This path continues through another portal into the courtyard, which frames a barrel-vaulted entrance and joins to part of the loggia that surrounds the entire courtyard. The loggia connects to rusticated piers at the edge of the roof. And at the center of the courtyard, a fountain stands on a stepped circular platform. On the other side of the fountain, a barrel-vaulted passage echoes the entrance portal and continues the path outside of the courtyard and to the southeast end of the villa complex. This southeast portal leads to an arched masonry bridge that extends across the center of a fish pond. And at the end of this bridge, a platform provides a panoramic view of the grassy field directly below and the countryside beyond. This field would have originally been a garden and would have followed early modern garden tradition by including an ordered arrangement of plants and fruit trees. The villa and its surrounding property became the possession of Giulio della Torre in 1504 as a wedding gift from Guido Antonio Maffei of Verona on behalf of his daughter and Giulio's bride-to-be, Anna. Although the original villa structure likely dates to the 14th or 15th century, the della Torre family's renovations largely occurred during the 1530s and 40s and were completed by 1562. The villa's architect remains unknown, but scholars have hypothesized that it was a collaborative effort in which Giulio della Torre may have played a significant role. Giulio became the male heir that the Maffei family lacked, enabling him to pass down the villa in Fumane to his own sons, Francesco and Girolamo, as well as his grandson, Marcantonio, all of whom played a role in the villa renovations. In addition to his careers in law and politics, Giulio had a documented interest in both art and the classics, as he sculpted bronze medals and portrait busts, and also wrote philosophical treatises in Latin. Although previous scholars have overlooked the connection, Giulio della Torre's fascination with both art and antiquity had a strong impact on his architectural choices at his villa. His affinity for antiquity emerges clearly in his bronze self-portrait bust, where he portrays himself with the heroic idealization reminiscent of Roman portrait busts. As inventories and eyewitness accounts suggest, Giulio likely had access to copies of ancient Roman sculptures that inspired his own renditions. Because of his elite status in Veronese society and his own artistic and intellectual pursuits, Giulio was well acquainted with the leading writers and scholars of his day. Within Giulio's lifetime and throughout successive generations, The Della Torre family's humanist circle included scholars such as Veronese physician and poet Girolamo Fracastoro, geographer and writer Giovanni Battista Ramusio, Cardinal Pietro Bembo, poet and historian Andrea Navagero, and courtesan and writer Veronica Franco. While many other intellectuals undoubtedly visited Villa della Torre to engage in discussion and debate within the pastoral setting, Veronica Franco's 1575 poem in praise of the villa is the only surviving text about a visit to the villa. By vividly describing the villa's exterior setting among fields and mountains and the lavish decorations of its interior, Franco memorializes her own experience at Villa della Torre. Her text reveals how a contemporary visitor might have experienced the villa's innovative architecture and emphasis on nature. Before concluding with an analysis of Franco's poem, the present study will explore how Giulio's interest in antiquity reflects his intentional choice of an enfilade, and how his artistic background motivated the careful curation of views of nature seen through the enfilade. Though it has been neglected thus far by previous scholars, Villa della Torre's enfilade is one of its most explicit references to antiquity. Deriving from the French enfile, meaning to stretch from end to end, the earliest known use of the word enfilade dates to the early 18th century. Functioning as a path or hallway that continues through various rooms, doorways, or portals to provide a clear view from one end of a space to another, an enfilade connects spaces and emphasizes the act of seeing and viewing. An enfilade often refers to linear views in interior spaces created through parallel doorways from one room to the next. Especially in the late 17th century, villa owners deliberately constructed extended continuous views inside their villas and palaces. On the other hand, there are far fewer instances of an exterior enfilade. The first mention of a path that unites outdoor spaces of a villa originated from the 1st century Roman author Pliny the Younger, who described the architectural choice in a letter about his villa in Laurentinum, likely located west of Rome near Ostia. Pliny writes, "From the back of the villa, one looks at the inner court, the open portico, then another portico, next the courtyard, then the forests and the far-off mountains." Although Pliny did not use the term enfilade to define this architectural feature, he appears to be the first to explicitly draw attention to architecture's facilitation of a landscape view between exterior villa spaces, such as a courtyard. By the early 16th century, it was customary for architects to incorporate elements from antique buildings, such as Pliny's villa design, into contemporary building projects. Given that no ancient Roman villas had been excavated in the Renaissance, early modern architects could rely only on textual descriptions found in Latin literature and circulated by contemporary translators and scholars. In the early 16th century, Latin transcriptions of Pliny's letters were available, as were new editions of the treatise on architecture, written by the 1st century Roman architect Vitruvius. While the contents of the Della Torre family's library before and during the renovation of their villa are unknown, Giulio's interest in Aristotelian texts, Roman coins, and his own classically inspired portrait bust indicate that it is probable that Giulio read these newly rediscovered classical texts. By constructing the Villa della Torre with a clear view from the entrance to the rear garden and vice versa, by means of framing portals, the Della Torre family imitated the enfilade structure that Pliny described in his villa. Portals, a courtyard, and a view of nature appear in both Pliny's Laurentine villa and the Villa della Torre. Just like Pliny describes through his porticos, the portals at Villa della Torre act as architectural intermediaries that encourage the viewer's progression through the space. Although 16th century villas in the Veneto often borrowed elements from antique villas, the Villa della Torre remains unique in its imitation of a Plinian enfilade. In contrast to an enfilade created within the interior of a space, or one without an unobstructed view of nature beyond the courtyard, a distinctly Plinian enfilade spans outdoor areas of the villa and immediately confronts the viewer with nature upon their exit from the courtyard. Although the Della Torre may have drawn inspiration for their villa's enfilade from other villas, they offer a unique interpretation of the architectural feature
that aligns more closely to Pliny's definition than any other contemporary villa in northern Italy. The most likely source of contemporary inspiration for the enfilade at Villa delle Torre was the Palazzo Te, which also uses portals to frame a linear path leading to and from a courtyard. Constructed in the first half of the 16th century for Mantuan ruler Federico II Gonzaga, Palazzo Te immediately leads its visitors into a courtyard. The enfilade directs the viewer to exit from the opposite end of the courtyard, pass through a perpendicular loggia, and walk across a bridge over a fish pond. The path continues beyond the bridge in the center of what was originally a garden space, until it terminates just before an arched enclosure that was added a century later to mark the rear end of the palace. The visitor's pathway at Palazzo Te closely resembles that of Villa delle Torre because the enfilade creates a route that moves from the villa's entrance, through a portal into a courtyard, and through another portal into an open, natural space. Given the visual similarities, it is highly plausible that the Roman architect Giulio Romano's design for Palazzo Te directly inspired the enfilade at Villa delle Torre, especially because some of the delle Torre family visited and worked in Mantua, located not far from Fumane. The enfilades of both villas extend through the outdoor spaces to frame the landscape by stone portals. Although today its view is more urban, in the 16th century, Palazzo Te would have looked out upon a landscape similar to that of Villa delle Torre. As a result, both villas resemble Pliny's description of the linear view at his villa. Pliny expressly notes that a view of the landscape is directly visible upon exiting the courtyard of his villa. Villa delle Torre achieves this same structure, as the exit from the courtyard and over the bridge to the fish pond greets its visitor with a panoramic view of the garden below and the landscape beyond. In the 16th century, Palazzo Te would have encouraged the same nature-oriented path with its formerly unobstructed landscape view. The example of Palazzo Te, then, proves that the delle Torre took inspiration from contemporary villas as well as ancient ones. However, since it was located in a country villa rather than an urban setting, Villa delle Torre had the advantage of enveloping its visitor in nature in a way that Palazzo Te could not. Villa delle Torre, therefore, more closely imitates the enfilade found at Pliny's countryside villa. Indeed, the purpose of the enfilade at Villa delle Torre is Plinian. That is, it points outward toward the landscape. At Villa delle Torre, one can see a visual companion to Pliny's words, since the hills and forests visible immediately beyond the villa's courtyard mirror the forests and far-off mountains seen upon exiting Pliny's courtyard. Through sequential spaces that produce a gradually revealed panoramic view of nature, Villa delle Torre successfully incorporates a Plinian route through its exterior spaces. Ultimately, the enfilade reveals the visual focus of the villa, the landscape. The enfilade of Villa delle Torre provides a direction for movement through the villa that prioritizes views of nature. Since Pliny's time, the visitor's successful engagement with surrounding gardens, trees, and hills was crucial for the villa's function as a rural retreat for intellectual pursuits. We cannot know precisely what type of garden view the villa had in the 16th century, but the lower terrace likely consisted of a garden and an orchard. In her poem about her visit to the villa, Veronica Franco specifically describes orange and cedar trees, also writing that the lovely garden's appearance gives pleasure with every well-kept and neatly planted part. The original gardens of Villa delle Torre would have augmented the conversation between nature and art that the enfilade facilitates. When examined through the lens of ancient precedents, the enfilade of Villa delle Torre promotes a unique relationship between architecture and nature. In a letter describing the view from a mountain nearby his Tuscan villa, Pliny writes, "You will take great pleasure if you were to look down upon this sight of the area from the mountain. For you will not seem to glimpse the lands for yourself, but rather some painted likeness approaching extraordinary beauty." At Villa delle Torre, the enfilade provides an architectural frame, literally, for the garden beyond, which becomes, in Pliny's words, almost like a painting. The enfilade creates a network of framing arches, the last arch of which opens to a garden. By deliberately articulating the way that visitors see the garden, the villa's enfilade characterizes the garden as a form of art. Because a garden purposefully modifies and arranges plants and trees, it occupies a unique middle position between something fashioned by the human hand, like art or architecture, and something existing naturally in the world, like trees, rivers, or mountains. Nature and artifice were often blended in 16th century garden spaces, and Renaissance writers even used the term terza natura, or third nature, to describe the liminal space that the garden occupies. As a manifestation of third nature at the end of the enfilade, the garden at Villa della Torre represents the symbiotic relationship between nature and art. Statius, a first-century Latin poet, also wrote in his collection of poems, the Sylvae, about the relationship between nature and art when describing the villa of the Roman aristocrat Paulius Felix. Located in Sorrento, Paulius's villa dominated a seaside cliff and exemplified the molding of nature into art. Statius writes that nature favored this place, and here, conquered, it yielded to the settler. With 1,000 vantage points and opportunities for viewing, Paulius's villa transformed nature into art to be viewed and admired. Like the texts of Pliny and Vitruvius, it is highly probable that the Della Torre and their visitors were acquainted with Statius's Sylvae, since this text was readily available in the 15th and 16th centuries. Although we don't know if she intentionally echoed the author, poet Veronica Franco uses language very similar to Statius when she describes her stay at Villa della Torre as the guest of her lover, Marcantonio, the grandson of Giulio. She writes, "While vision finds delight turned in one direction, in some other one it discovers another sort of beauty." Franco encourages her reader to imagine the view alongside her, just as the villa's enfilade facilitates a visual experience. As a framing device, the enfilade guides the visitor through the act of viewing until they reach the garden's merging of nature and art. And the garden, as a representation of third nature, signified man's improvement of nature and the transformation of natural form into art. Veronica Franco hints at this concept of third nature in her poem. Descriptions of nature are scattered all throughout her text, but Franco begins by recounting her own delight with the villa and its unforgettable impression of beauty. Her first mention of a concrete aspect of the villa is its surrounding countryside. From there, she commences a pastoral wandering through each element of the landscape until she discusses the contributions that architecture has made to the space. By introducing the villa's setting before the villa itself, Franco endorses a nature-driven perspective of Villa della Torre. Just like the enfilade at the villa greets the visitor with an immediate linear path towards nature, so too does Franco illustrate the guiding role that nature plays in augmenting the villa's architectural features. She comments on the roles of art in nature when she credits the marvel of the gardens to the gardener that orchestrates their appearance. She writes, "Art does not yield to nature the glory of the garden's artifice, adorned with rare trees and a mantle evergreen. The gardener, in her eyes Marcantonio, enables nature's expression of beauty by shaping it into a curated garden space." Indeed, Franco concludes her poem by praising Marcantonio, stating that she would like to speak in praise of the Lord who owns the villa, giving him credit for the beauty of the place. The Della Torre are therefore the landscape architects of this third nature. But more than simply constructing a garden, they install, through the enfilade, a unique architectural solution that promotes their own ingenuity in curating nature. At the end of her poem, after celebrating the villa's display of nature and the villa's current owner, Marcantonio, Franco declares this villa more beautiful than any villa she has ever seen. The villa's extraordinary display of nature, through both garden and landscape, and the curatorial skill of the Della Torre family render the villa worthy of Franco's attribution of universal beauty. Her poem encapsulates the Della Torre's aim to consciously curate pleasurable viewing of nature by means of architecture. She fully submitted herself to the Della Torre's mission to create an environment that awakens wonder, privileges nature, and emphasizes their familial ingenuity. Through their renovations to the Fumane Villa, the Della Torre family did not simply follow architectural features or invent novel solutions, but they equipped their villa to accomplish both ends. Informed by intellectual and artistic endeavors, the Della Torre family created a site that seamlessly integrated architecture and nature. Applying Giulio Della Torre's interests in art and antiquity to an exploration of his villa's enfilade offers a crucial interdisciplinary approach to a study of the patron-architectural relationship at Villa Della Torre. The appreciation for antiquity shared among many generations of the Della Torre family motivated architectural choices like the enfilade, while Giulio's artistic activity and philosophical interests inspired the villa's nature-oriented view. Reflecting the family's identity and interests, the enfilade of Villa Della Torre frames a route through the villa, creating a carefully curated view of nature that imitates classical villas and emphasizes the relationship between nature and art. Thank you.
Thank you, Annika. Our next speaker is Beatrice Bradley, presenting Envisioning Expansion, Commercial and Colonial Ties in Jacopo Zucchi's Fishing for Coral for Ferdinando I de' Medici. There.
In 1642, the painter and art historian Giovanni Baglione provided the earliest known description of fishing for coral, one of 6 oil-on-copper paintings of the same subject created by Jacopo Zucchi and his workshop at the end of the 16th century. Baglione described the work as a coral fishery with many nude women, though small, among whom are various portraits of beautiful Roman ladies of that time, and mentions it as part of a studiolo or luxury cabinet in the Villa Medici, the former Roman residence of Cardinal Ferdinando I de' Medici, later Grand Duke of Tuscany. Today, the 6 paintings are dispersed across private collections and museums. All the panels show the same general composition: a lush tropical seascape featuring a group of classicized sea nymphs draped in silken garments, resting on a rocky islet adorned with brilliant red coral, iridescent pearls, and vibrant seashells. Behind the nymphs, athletic figures, both black and white, gather coral and oysters from the sea, hauling these treasures ashore in large nets. Most scholars agree that Baglione's description refers to a version of fishing for coral housed in the Borghese Gallery in Rome, created around 1585 during Ferdinando's cardinalate as the first of its kind. Another version, in Lviv, Ukraine, is unique among all variations for its prominent portrait of Ferdinando. Recently dated to the 1590s, the Lviv painting was created during Ferdinando's reign as Grand Duke. During this period, Ferdinando played a crucial role in the development of the port of Livorno, which provided the Medici with key access to the Americas through mercantile connections across the Atlantic. Although many scholars have considered the portraits and mythological motifs present in the Borghese and Lviv panels, as well as the likely placement of these paintings on early modern studioli cabinets similar to this one, none have thoroughly investigated them in the context of the Medici dynasty's growing economic and colonial pursuits at the end of the 16th century. The present study links the Borghese and Lviv fishing for coral paintings to the ruling family's development of Livorno, and specifically to Ferdinando's efforts to claim territories in the Americas. I argue that the fishing for coral panels promoted the Grand Duchy of Tuscany's commercial success and aspirations for colonial expansion to the Americas under Medici rule, showcasing the luxury commodities of Mediterranean coral, Caribbean pearls, and the labor and ships that sustained these industries. The Borghese panel includes a prominent portrait of the Roman noblewoman Clelia Farnese Cesarini, depicted as a central nymph who holds aloft a large cluster of coral and a shell filled with pearls. Clelia was courted by Ferdinando during his cardinalate and gave birth to his son in 1586. Beside the noblewoman, a black archer, adorned with a strap set with large pearls and holding a striking red bow, gazes outward at the viewer, presenting a splendid red, green, and blue parrot perched on his extended right arm. A spider monkey, the second tropical animal to appear in the painting, sits draped in coral beads amidst mounds of treasure at the bottom of the composition, joined by a Poseidon-like figure crowned with coral and wrapped in pearls. Around the central scene, black and white figures are shown rowing canoes and harvesting oysters from beneath the waves. The Borghese and the Vive panel differ most notably from one another in the following details. In the Borghese version, the Black archer sits where Ferdinando's portrait appears in the Lviv composition. Furthermore, Ferdinando is shown with the same red bow as that of the archer. Displaying an oyster filled with pearls, Ferdinando sits triumphantly among the women, presiding over the rich landscape and laborers around him. Born in 1549 as the fifth child of Duke Cosimo I de' Medici and Duchess Eleonora di Toledo, Ferdinando began an ecclesiastical career as cardinal in 1562 at the age of 13. During his cardinalate, Ferdinando developed an intense fascination with the Americas, strategically utilizing his privileged religious and diplomatic networks to gather information about the New World through the avid collection of maps, artifacts, and written chronicles. His early political endeavors as Cardinal Protector of Spain also demonstrate his conscious interest in the Spanish Habsburg presence in the Americas. The Borghese fishing for coral undoubtedly reflects Ferdinando's early interest in the New World, preceding his later, more tangible efforts to acquire territories in South and Central America once he took the Tuscan throne. After the death of his brother Francesco I in 1587, Ferdinando renounced his clerical role to fulfill his dynastic duties as the third Grand Duke of Tuscany. As Grand Duke, Ferdinando's interest in the Americas surpassed a mere affinity for exotic objects and artistic patronage when this enthusiasm began to influence his political vision for the future of Tuscany. These endeavors are reflected more explicitly in the Lviv fishing for coral, which places the Grand Ducal portrait of Ferdinando within the imagined landscape of the New World. While some scholars argue that the fishing for coral panels function as visual inventories of the exotic, depicting tropical animals, precious stones, and people of different skin tones, others suggest that the compositions reference colonial life in the Spanish colonies on the Pearl Coast of present-day Venezuela, communicating commercial and territorial opportunity in the Americas. The ships visible on the horizon of the Borghese and the Vive panels, however, have not been addressed by scholars. Upon closer examination, these vessels may hint at Ferdinando's emerging interest in American colonization, as they resemble the caravel ships used by European explorers in the 16th century to cross the Atlantic in search of land and wealth. I propose that the naval vessels, bountiful display of natural resources, and labor portrayed in the fishing for coral paintings illustrate the fruits of trade at the port of Livorno, as well as Ferdinando's hopeful vision of the land and resources awaiting Tuscany as he began his colonial pursuit of the Americas. The Borghese and Lviv panels' subject, medium, and dimensions are in keeping with works that functioned as decorative paintings on 16th century studioli, elaborate wooden cabinets often outfitted with painted doors, inlaid stone, and secret compartments. Although in the early modern period, the term studiolo usually referred to a small study, in the case of the Zucchi panels, it almost certainly meant a cabinet for storing and organizing rare and precious items. Both measuring approximately 55 by 45 centimeters and painted on copper supports, the Borghese and Lviv paintings are consistent with that of a painted sportello, or cabinet door. To visualize the role of the painting on a cabinet, I've created this reconstruction to show how fishing for coral may have looked as a decorative door on the 16th century furniture. Hinged on the stained walnut exterior, Zucchi's vivid oil on copper scenes may have complemented an opulent cabinet and its precious contents. Curiosities housed inside this type of furniture could include expensive trinkets like gemstones, shells, fossils, ancient coins, and artifacts from distant regions. Benefiting from their established alliance with Spain in the mid to late 1500s, the Medici Grand Dukes acquired precious natural resources from the Americas, like Peruvian silver and Caribbean pearls. These treasures were often stored alongside Mediterranean coral in the luxury cabinets. Additionally, studioli cabinets often functioned as microcosms of the patron's imagination, expressing their ambitions, fascinations, and beliefs through miniature decorative programs and curated contents. For powerful rulers like Ferdinando, the Studiolo offered a tangible opportunity to visualize, compile, and remotely conquer distant regions through small-scale collections, often extracted and traded by colonial powers. A Studiolo cabinet filled with items from the Mediterranean and the Americas could have communicated Ferdinando's narrative of Tuscan commercial success and the opportunities it provided for accessing both resources and territory in the New World. Like many princely rulers of the early modern period, Ferdinando used gifts to reinforce his diplomatic ties in Europe, as well as a way to connect the Medici to Atlantic trade with the Spanish Americas. During the late 16th century, Florentine participation in overseas trade and territorial expansion relied primarily on strong diplomatic ties with internationally established powers like the Spanish Habsburgs. The formation and protection of these alliances depended heavily on the calculated distribution of luxury gifts. Ferdinando's gift-giving habits, which included gifting studioli, suggest another possible role of the Studiolo cabinet at the Medici court, as well as a plausible explanation for the addition of Ferdinando's Grand Ducal portrait in the Lviv panel in the additional versions of Fishing for Coral made by Zucchi's workshop. Gifted as part of a cabinet or as an individually framed painting, Fishing for Coral would have pronounced Ferdinando's role as a key player in the mercantile success of Livorno, while also communicating his growing colonial ambitions in the Americas. In the mid to late 1500s, Florence witnessed an increase in decorative programs depicting the four natural elements: fire, earth, air, and water. Although scholars rightly connect Zucchi's Florentine training to his propensity for elemental compositions, certain details of the Borghese and Lviv panels, such as the ships, black figures, and depicted methods of pearl harvest, deviate from earlier paintings portraying the allegory of water in Florence. The Fishing for Coral panel's departure from the trend of elemental decoration is further established by the Pearl Fishers, painted by the Florentine artist Alessandro Allori as the allegory of water in Francesco I's Studiolo in Palazzo Vecchio. The painting offers a highly idealized view of pearl harvest, as pale-skinned men, women, and children dive for pearls within a tranquil seascape. This romanticized scene contrasts with Zucchi's more authentic depiction of pearl harvest, using nets and weighted ropes, period techniques known to be perilous, as well as his inclusion of black figures in each of the 6 versions. Zucchi's shift away from an idealized mode of portraying pearl harvest to one depicting the potential dangers and racial differences present in the actual methods used could reflect his patron's larger interests in contemporary events of the 16th century. In the 1590s, Ferdinando significantly increased his global reach by expanding the role of the port of Livorno, an endeavor celebrated in the 1616 print. For decades, Pisa had been Tuscany's main port, but by the mid-15th century, a buildup of silt from the Arno River reduced its productivity, prompting new investments into Livorno as a Tuscan center for trade. Positioned on the Tyrrhenian Sea, the port opened access to flourishing commercial networks on the greater Mediterranean, as well as across the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. The temperate waters of the Mediterranean provided an ideal habitat for the growth of red coral, a precious marine organism that reached a high demand at the end of the 16th century. Ferdinando capitalized on this opportunity, heavily investing in its processing and export from Livorno, transforming the industry into a booming enterprise. The luxury commodity was prized for its protective properties and religious symbolism, as well as its vibrant red color and durability, as it could be easily carved and processed into beads and other intricate objects. To harvest coral, fishermen used X-shaped wooden contraptions with affixed nets to detach the branches and haul them to the surface. Coral was also collected manually by men who dove into the sea to retrieve the stalks from the rocky reefs, as illustrated in this 1578 print showing coral divers in Sicily. A nymph in the Fishing for Coral series is shown swimming in a similar manner with a red coral branch in her hand. She appears in all versions. After its harvest, the coral was sold to artisans who skillfully transformed the petrified organisms into superbly crafted rosaries, amulets, and devotional pendants. The demand for Mediterranean coral intensified in the early 1590s when Ferdinando granted licenses to craftsmen from Marseille and Genova to process coral in Livorno. From this point on, the Livornese coral industry rose in profitability, reaching its height in the mid-17th century as a global center for refinement and export. The Borghese fishing for coral clearly demonstrates Ferdinando's profound interest in coral as cardinal, which predated his administrative involvement in the enterprise years later. Yet while both the Borghese and Lviv panels allude to Ferdinando's fascination with coral, the addition of his portrait to the Lviv panel may have been introduced to concretely advertise his contribution to the widespread export of the Tuscan product from Livorno in the late 16th century. In 1591 and 1593, Ferdinando passed the Legge Livornine, which proposed religious freedoms and financial incentives for foreign merchants, including Jews and Turks. The laws were intended to boost economic relations with foreign powers, increase traffic at the port, and grow Livorno's population. In addition to merchants settling at the port, a significant portion of Livorno's inhabitants were enslaved Ottoman Muslims, Maghrebi North Africans, and Sub-Saharan Africans that had been captured on the Mediterranean Sea by members of the Medici-founded chivalric order of Santo Stefano. Ferdinando was heavily involved in the Livornese slaving economy, which primarily exploited captives as galley slaves on Medici naval vessels. Monuments like Pietro Cacca's I Quattro Mori in Livorno attest to the brutal reality of slavery in 16th century Tuscany and the enslaved populations that lived there. It is possible that the presence of Black figures in all versions of Fishing for Coral reference the contemporary enslavement of sub-Saharan Africans at the port of Livorno. Ferdinando's fervent drive to expand the Grand Duchy and establish Tuscan colonies in the Americas is directly expressed in a 1608 letter from the Grand Duke to his Medici ambassador at the Spanish Habsburg court in Brazil. In the letter, Ferdinando's request for land describes some place in New Spain or on the coast of Brazil. Ferdinando's attempt to create a Tuscan colony was almost realized when he selected a plot of land, today known as French Guiana, to serve as the site for a town to be populated with Tuscans from Livorno and Lucca. Under Ferdinando's protection, the Englishman Robert Thornton prepared a caravel likely similar to these, called the Santa Lucia Bonaventura, and set out from Livorno in 1608 on an expedition to northern Brazil in search of goods and territory. Thornton returned in 1609 with his ship full of tropical animals, gold, and native peoples taken from South America. Ferdinando's death shortly after the expedition effectively marked the end of his campaign of American colonization. Painted before the Grand Duke's letter and the voyage to South America, the ships on the horizons of the Borghese and Lviv paintings may allude to the thriving trade at the port of Livorno. At the same time, they may also offer an early glimpse of Ferdinando's ambition to expand the Grand Duchy through expeditions like those of the Santa Lucia Bonaventura, reflecting his awareness of profitable industries and available territories in the New World, as well as a hopeful Tuscan presence there. Finally, Ferdinando may have gathered knowledge of the Central American pearl industry and the enslavement of sub-Saharan Africans there from period chronicles, especially those of the Florentine merchant slave trader Galeotto Che. Chapters from his voyage and account of the Indies, published in circa 1553, detail the conditions of enslaved indigenous and African populations on the Pearl Coast in present-day Venezuela. Che explained how the indigenous populations used a system of ropes, nets, and weights to sink to the seabed before manually collecting oysters in nets and baskets. These methods are very similar to Zucchi's painted depictions of figures carrying ropes weighted with rocks and nets filled with oysters. To satiate Europe's hunger for pearls, divers were often forced to swim up to 30 feet below the ocean's surface, the intense pressure leading to burst eardrums and crushed lungs. Although most of the indigenous groups perished under the inhumane living conditions imposed by the Spanish, the demand for new labor was quickly supplied through an influx of enslaved West Africans sold from the Cape Verde Islands by men like Che. Zucchi and Ferdinando had knowledge of the enslavement of sub-Saharan Africans in the New World, which could explain their prominence in the Fishing for Coral paintings. The possible references to contemporaneous slavery occurring in both the Americas and Livorno were concealed and made palatable for courtly viewers of the Fishing for Coral paintings, which in turn glorify Mediterranean coral, mounds of precious pearls, and the Medici within an idyllic and mythologized landscape. Zucchi's Fishing for Coral paintings capture the dynamic interplay of art, commerce, and colonial ambition under Ferdinando Primo de' Medici in 16th century Tuscany. Blending fantastical imagery with historical context, the paintings depict coral and pearl harvests in both local and distant regions, highlighting the industries central to Ferdinando's interests and pursuits as both Cardinal and Grand Duke. Beyond their decorative origins, these works serve as visual narratives of the Medici's expanding global reach, with allusions to Livorno's thriving trade and the New World's material riches. Either displayed on studioli cabinets or presented individually as diplomatic gifts, the paintings glorified the Medici while subtly revealing the enterprises and labor central to their success. Through their fusion of mythology, exoticism, and historical reality, the Fishing for Coral panels celebrate Ferdinando's vision of Tuscany as a maritime and colonial power, enshrining his impact on trade and territorial expansion from Tuscany to the Americas. Thank you.
Thank you, Bea. Our last speaker is Catherine Dollar, presenting The Witching Hour, Time and Magic in Salvatore Rosa's Cleveland Scenes of Witchcraft. Kate.
Salvatore Rosa's Scenes of Witchcraft series, painted during his time in Florence, is a powerful blend of his fascination with the supernatural and Stoic philosophy. In this four-part series, Rosa depicts witches performing dark, fantastical rituals at different times of day: morning, day, evening, and night. This work is not unique only for This work is not only unique for its subject matter, but also for its exploration of time, a concept Rosa uses to reflect the Stoic view of cosmic order and disorder. By juxtaposing scenes of witchcraft of the four times of day, Rosa's witches become forces that disrupt the logical, predictable flow of time, embodying chaos within an otherwise orderly cycle. I propose that Rosa's Scenes of Witchcraft communicates his belief that his contemporary world was in a chaotic phase of the cosmic cycle, and will examine how Rosa uses historical context, social perceptions, and the visual elements of the Tondi series to convey this philosophy. Rosa's Scenes of Witchcraft series is of 4 tondi, or circular paintings, that juxtapose various types of magic practitioners. The first tondo, Morning, depicts a young sorceress seated on a rock before a jagged cliff as the sun rises. Positioned at the center, she is surrounded by bird-like monsters and oversized amphibians, one of which she stabs with a sword. The next tondo, Day, shows a group of nude, elderly witches, one of whom dismounts an enormous owl, clutching a broom in one hand and squeezing liquid from a sponge onto a giant reptile below her with the other. Another witch on the left cuts into the same reptile, while 2 others behind her hold up human skulls. Evening also features 3 semi-nude witches at its center. The leftmost witch kneels among magical tools and holds a torch over a lit cauldron, while 2 other witches stand behind her, one of whom holds a mirror. To the right, a skeletal monster holds an hourglass looming above. The series concludes with Night, which shows a standing male necromancer at the lower right, flanked by 2 kneeling men. The necromancer raises a wand with his right hand and holds a book in his left, gazing at the monsters before him, while 2 knights on the left watch unnoticed. Numerous publications have been written about Salvatore Rosa's life, his involvement in the Accademia dei Percosi, a group of intellectuals with whom Rosa met frequently, as well as his engagement with unconventional subject matters in much of his written and visual body of work. However, the theme of time remains largely unexplored across Rosa's artistic output. My presentation offers a closer examination of the 4 times of day in the Cleveland Tondi, with a particular focus on how Rosa's reference to time connects to witchcraft. In doing so, I propose that the witches can be read as a disruptive force that threatens the logical, cyclical order of time typically seen in Stoic philosophy. By linking witchcraft and the nature of time, Rosa created a commentary on the disordered state that he believed his contemporary world was in. Salvatore Rosa was born in Naples in 1615, where he discovered his interest in art and developed his skills during his adolescence. The positive attention that Rosa's early works garnered, predominantly landscapes and battle scenes, allowed him to relocate to Florence in autumn of 1640 on the invitation of Giovan Carlo de' Medici to serve as a court painter. He would remain in Florence until 1649, when he moved permanently to Rome. The Cleveland Tondi are first documented in an inventory of Palazzo Niccolini on Via dei Servi in Florence from 1657. Ownership by the Niccolini, a noble Florentine family, establishes that Rosa's scenes of witchcraft were viewed within a domestic setting. Although the Palazzo Niccolini inventory does not indicate how the Tondi were displayed in relation to each other, documents regarding witches at their incantations, another contemporary witchcraft painting by Rosa, may offer some insight. A letter written by Rosa in 1666 reveals that this painting was purchased by the Roman banker Carlo de' Rossi, who kept it in his private collection, covered by a curtain at the end of his gallery. De' Rossi's choice to cover this image suggests that the curtain was intended to be lifted as a stunning grand finale to guests' tour of his collection, creating a dramatic moment that spurred conversation. While it cannot be confirmed whether the Cleveland Tondi had curtains, they likely served a similar function as impressive conversation pieces. Rosa created a total of 20 surviving images focused on witchcraft from 1640 to the mid-1650s, and one poem entitled La Strega, or The Witch. Like those in the Cleveland Tondi and witches at their incantations, the figures that appear in the other paintings he produced during this period are most frequently elderly women, partially or entirely nude, performing acts of diabolical magic. Younger women and men also appear, but in smaller numbers. Demonic figures are present in many of these paintings as well, incorporating many of the tropes that were common in images of witchcraft produced throughout Europe at a time when there was a surge in witch hunts. Thus, a broader consideration of witchcraft in early modern Europe can provide a richer context for understanding the social and historical backdrop of Rosa's Cleveland Tondi. Between 1550 and 1700, fear of witchcraft spread in Europe, with violent trials in the north, whereas Italian authorities typically issued milder punishments. The severity of witch trials in Northern Europe resulted in a standardized depiction of the witch north of the Alps. Prints, as an affordable and easily distributed media, circulated popular depictions to warn the public, such as this one by Polish artist Jan Zionko. Northern witches were often portrayed as old, scowling, naked, and disheveled. They often used domestic items, such as brooms, may be accompanied by animals associated with the devil, including cats, goats, and owls, and participate in condemnable activities, such as infanticide, sex with demons, and flight. While the archetype of an old hag prevailed, images of young women also appeared to encourage scrutiny of all suspicious figures. Similarly, German artist Albrecht Dürer's The Witch widely circulated across Europe. This engraving shows an old witch seated backward on a goat, with her hair defying natural laws by blowing in the wrong direction, an embodiment of the belief that witches subverted nature. Dürer's student, Hans Baldung Grien, also produced notable images of witches, such as his woodcut Witches' Sabbath, which portrays witches gathered around a cauldron preparing a magical flying ointment. Rosa's knowledge of witchcraft imagery was likely informed by these and other northern sources that circulated in Italy. However, due to Italy's relatively mild witch hunt craze, its depiction of witches differed significantly from the northern archetype, instead showing sorceresses who are serene, young, and beautiful. Before Rosa's lifetime, witches appeared less frequently in Italian art. Those that survive depict classical sorceresses capable of both good and evil magic. Dosso Dossi's A Sorceress is a typical example, likely showing Circe or Melissa, seated in a magical circle with transformed animals, presumably men she has enchanted. Classical legends often show such sorceresses using beauty to lure and control men, disrupting nature's order by transforming human forms. Rosa's morning tondo echoes Dosi's enchantress type, a youthful, composed sorceress contrasting with the wild hags in day and evening. Although morning lacks transformation magic, its young sorceress brings disorder by consorting with demons and killing a toad-like creature. Rosa's mix of Italian and Northern witch imagery suggests he drew from diverse sources to craft a distinctive set of witchcraft scenes that would have likely been presented to his peers who shared his interests. During his decade in Florence, Rosa was deeply involved with the Accademia dei Percosi, a group of learned men interested in philosophy and the occult, who provided a receptive audience for his witchcraft-themed works. Rosa quickly built this social network, allowing him to explore topics and art forms outside of those favored by the Medici court, a working environment towards which he became disdainful. Members included poets, playwrights, philosophers, and others, took turns hosting regular meetings in the form of dinner parties during which they performed improvised plays, recited poetry, and debated philosophical ideas, particularly those of Stoicism. Central to Stoic philosophy is the belief that virtue is achieved through living in harmony with nature's laws that are governed by logos, a Greek concept that assigns logical order to the universe. Another crucial facet of Stoic cosmology is the concept of eternal recurrence, in which the cosmos endlessly undergoes a repeated succession of stages in a specific, predictable order. The Cleveland Tondi expressed this theory well. Like the Stoic cosmic cycle, the Tondi are broken into different consecutive stages that follow a fixed sequence and infinitely repeat. Rosa's merging of this cyclical structure with witchcraft imagery complicates the paintings in an unprecedented way, suggesting that the witch's powers threaten the universe's order. The Accademia was also fascinated with the occult, generally witchcraft and demonology. Rosa's aforementioned poem, La Strega, written in 1646, reflects this, which can be seen in the evening tondo. Describing a witch who inhabits a dark, gloomy environment and brews a potion to exact revenge on a man who has rejected her romantic propositions, Rosa's witch proclaims, "I will summon the infernal horde to cast a black spell, burn a cypress, a myrtle, and meanwhile, little by little, I'll melt his wax image." In the evening tondo, we see a wax figure next to the cauldron and a skeletal demon above the witches, reinforcing the contents of the poem. The objects used and actions performed by the evening witches are also referenced in early modern demonologies, suggesting that Rosa was familiar with them. These texts explain how witches use wax figures and summon demons in love magic, as seen in Evening. Rosa's familiarity with these texts is further supported by his knowledge of Latin, the typical language of demonologies and witch hunting guidebooks, which allowed him to read them. A letter from Rosa's close friend, Giovan Battista Ricciardi, to an unknown recipient, shows the occult interests of Rosa and the Accademia, listing books on demonology and witchcraft. Because Rosa and Ricciardi often shared occult texts, this indicates their mutual knowledge in these areas. As an audience, members of the Accademia dei Percosi were particularly receptive to Rosa's ideas and educated about the esoteric subjects he handles in scenes of witchcraft, enabling him to explore them in conjunction with the 4 times of day, which is entirely novel to the visual arts of Italy. Throughout early modern Europe, personifications of time often appeared as hours, months, seasons, or the ages of man, with representations of the 4 times of day evenly divided into 4 parts being rarer, and appear to be unprecedented prior to the tombs Michelangelo created for Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici in the Medici Chapel at San Lorenzo in 1521-24. Dawn and dusk are positioned below Lorenzo on his sarcophagus, and Giuliano's tomb, directly across from Lorenzo's, features the allegories of day and night. By placing the Medici dukes above the allegories of time, they are situated within the cosmic cycle of time, yet strive to rise above it. Maya Wellington Gatton suggests these sculptures represent the Medici's desire to dominate time so that they are not forgotten, aiming to control it. Gatton's theory can be compared to the witches in Rosa's Tondi who invert the order of the cosmos, bringing nature under their command. Given Rosa's close connection to the Medici during the first half of his tenure in Florence, and the extreme popularity of Michelangelo's sculptures for the Medici Chapel, it is reasonable to conclude that he was familiar with them. Additional depictions of the 4 times of day prior to Rosa's Tondi can be found in Northern European art, particularly Dutch prints produced between the late 16th and early 17th centuries. In this 1595 engraving, the 4 times of day appear as humanized figures lying on clouds above various scenes of daily life to express the natural order of the world and thus the universe. Like Rosa's Cleveland Tondi, these representations of time of day aim to remind viewers of the unchanging and universal nature of time. This French print of the times of day, however, features grotesque satyrs, agents of chaos in Greek and Roman art, echoing the disruptive figures of Rosa's witches. Additionally, this French artist may have aimed to convey the sentiment that his world was disordered since his homeland, the Kingdom of France, was involved in a foreign war. He and Rosa both used figures of disorder to subvert the traditionally orderly theme, possibly to reflect their discontent with the social turmoil of their times, as Rosa himself expressed disdain for court life and the misery of his times in his letters. While Rosa's Cleveland Tondi shares similarities with these preceding images of the 4 times of day, his paintings are distinctive for connecting time to witchcraft. Time itself is reliable and predictable. One can always rely on the hours, seasons, and months to progress in the same order without variation. The essential characteristics of the witches in the Cleveland Tondi are antithetical to this. By including witches engaging in violent and magical acts, Rosa conveys a sense of chaos and disruption inflicted upon the natural order of the universe. In the Morning Tondo, the young sorceress stabs a large amphibious beast, an action that symbolizes destruction rather than creation. In early modern Italian society, young women were valued for their potential to create life and contribute to societal continuity. By committing violence, this young witch defies her expected role, inducing chaos and reversing societal expectations. Her use of a sword, a weapon associated with men, further signifies her disruptive power, blending both masculine and feminine attributes in a manner that challenges social and natural order. The hags in day, holding skulls and flying on an owl, act as harbingers of death, disturbing the deceased's peaceful state of rest and defying natural laws. Their aged appearance and wild, disheveled hair underscore the rejection of societal norms and their role as agents of disorder. These symbols underscore their opposition to nature and societal order. The owl, an animal often associated with death and night, becomes a means of defying the natural laws of gravity and order when ridden by the witch. The hag's unkempt appearances and grotesque expressions further emphasize their association with decay and societal disruption, highlighting their roles as agents of chaos. In evening, the witches engage in love magic, using wax votive figure and astrological symbols for Aries and Taurus that appear on a piece of paper to manipulate emotions. Books of magic written in the Renaissance state that lunar phases linked to earth signs, like Taurus, are suitable for summoning spirits, while fire signs like Aries are associated with love magic. This complex ritual exemplifies the witch's attempts to influence human desire, thus disturbing the natural order of emotions and relationships. Additionally, a skeletal demon holding an hourglass looms above them, reinforcing the notion that the witch's actions tamper with time itself. By summoning demons and altering emotions, the witches defy both natural and cosmic laws, solidifying their role as disruptors in the Tondi cycle. The male sorcerer appearing in the night Tondo shares the evening witch's unnatural practice of consorting with demons, solidly linking him to the role of disruptor. Likened to a necromancer, he defies nature by nullifying the effects of death. In early modern Italy, necromancers were also known for treasure hunting magic, often summoning demons to locate hidden riches. The presence of demons, along with a shovel and spade, suggests he was hired for this purpose. Although treasure hunting magic was usually not considered harmful, the hushed gestures of the armor-clad figures to the left suggest that there is indeed an illicit or forbidden element to what they are observing, connecting back to the notion of disrupting cosmic and societal order. Rosa's Scenes of Witchcraft is a remarkable series of paintings, one of whose essential themes, the 4 times of day, is rare in early modern Italy and has been largely overlooked. While we cannot be certain about Rosa's thoughts and motivations, I posit that he used the subject of witchcraft to create a narrative commentary on the cyclic, logical nature of time and Stoic cosmology that would have been discussed with the Accademia dei Percosi. This consideration of scenes of witchcraft as a reflection on cyclic time and the current stage of the universe clarifies the connections in Rosa's interests, primarily the occult and Stoicism. By depicting witches at various times of the day, Rosa suggested that the world was in, or was entering, a state of chaotic disorder that was part of an infinite cosmic cycle by depicting various witches behaving in a chaotic yet expected manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And if I could ask Bea and Annika to come up to the front of the room. And Eli, could you turn on? Oh, great, thank you. Beat me to it, Bea. We've now heard 3 more extraordinary presentations by our students, and you, audience, have a chance to ask them any questions about any of the 3 papers you've just heard. So the microphone has been witched, but it is, I think, come back to life. So
I have a question for Annika. Can you say something about how what, by your account, was a lush landscaped garden turned into a green lawn? And also, what kind of plantings and design and fauna or flora would such a garden have contained?
Yeah, so the question is kind of about what the garden would have actually looked like in the 16th century, what kinds of plants would have been there. And honestly, I haven't found a lot of information on that. Most of my research has been kind of estimating what it could have looked like based on other gardens. But I at least know that that lawn area was, according to Veronica Franco's account, and also a couple other maps we have from the period that we have to take with a grain of salt, but that it was probably kind of a lined orchard space. And I know that the villa itself was less connected to production as like an agricultural kind of component of the villa. It was less focused on that than other villas of the time, and also in the Veneto. And so probably the flowers, not the flowers, the plants or the things that were growing there were more orchard or vineyard connected rather than like actual agricultural production.
Okay, I have a question actually for Beatrice or Beatrice. I really enjoyed your paper, and actually I enjoyed all 3, so well done. I had a question about your paper. Got me thinking about the materiality of coral. And I was thinking typically, right, when a ruler gets involved in trade and commerce, in addition to being profitable, the material is often deemed honorable in some way. So you touched on the apotropaic qualities, right, for pregnant mothers and children, and also the religious significance. And it got me thinking, probably you've seen this in the Studiolo of Francesco, because I saw you had some images up there. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's a panel by Vasari.
Yes.
I think it's Perseus freeing.
Andromeda, yes.
Exactly. So I was wondering, you know, in that scene where Medusa's head is kind of by the water, and as he's freeing Andromeda, her blood is kind of dripping into the sea. And this is what I've heard is a myth of how coral, right, was then created. So I was wondering if you saw any classical significance also maybe tied to coral. I don't know. I just thought of this panel when you were giving your presentation, so I thought I would ask the expert.
Yes, thank you. So thinking about any classical roots for the significance of coral in the early modern period, in terms of what I've encountered in my research, I haven't seen much of the classical significance of coral, but thinking about the blood in the Perseus and Andromeda panel, I know that the religious significance of coral has to do primarily with
upon air, when the marine organism is exposed to air, it is then petrified. And this was thought in the early modern period to be very close to the resurrection of Christ, and that it was a kind of material that had kind of a dual function. It could be both alive and dead at the same time, much like Christ. So I'm not sure if those two are related, but I would assume that if the blood of Andromeda in this case perhaps had some kind of significance also with the blood of Christ and the religious understandings of the period. But in terms of specific classical examples, I haven't encountered much of that in my research. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question for Catherine. And I want to say all 6 presentations were fantastic. So thank you all so much. I wanted to ask specifically about the wax figurine that you mentioned. And I was just kind of curious if wax is something that came up a lot in your research when you were thinking about witches and you know, that sort of thing. I'm interested in the material, so.
Yeah, that's a great question. So regarding the use of wax as a material in witchcraft, it primarily comes up as a material used for these votive figures, since they were meant to melt down, thus connecting to the target that the witches are projecting this magic onto, as well as candles, of course. But outside of these votive figures and candles, there really isn't much mention of wax. It's mostly just these 2 objects. Thank you so much.
Yes, 6 great presentations. Thank you all. My question is for Bea. There was another prominent figure in the Lviv panel that you didn't speak about, the woman on the right-hand side, that what didn't appear in the first one. Did you find any information about that?
Yes, are you referring to Clelia Farnese? Or, okay, so there's.
Oh, maybe I
yes.
just missed
No, no, no,
you
no, no.
talking about
I did
her.
not mention this, but in the Lviv panel, there is an alleged portrait of Christine of Lorraine, who was the wife of Ferdinando Primo. Yes, all the way on, no, it's not there, all the way on the right, and she was added. I did encounter that argument in my research, and while I do think it has some ground, I found that given, at that point, you know, the portrait of Clelia is so prominent still. To me, it seems strange that he would also have a portrait of his current wife at the same time. But I mean, I don't know Ferdinando, maybe he did both, but I did encounter that argument. However, I chose not to include it in my capstone paper just because I personally was not convinced, but also I think that there is enough evidence to suggest that maybe it was added, given that it was made in the 1590s after the marriage of Ferdinando and Christina of Lorraine. But if you all look at the painting again, you will see she's on the far right, right near a large bunch of coral. So, thank you.
And is there one last question?
I've really enjoyed all of those. Thank you very much. The question's for Catherine. I was really intrigued by what you mentioned with demons being summoned by witches as part of this magic, and of Latin being this language of occultism and demon summoning and stuff. Do you know any more about where that comes from? Because I know it was the language of the church, and that there's some stuff about clergymen supposedly controlling demons. But where does the association between witches and demon summoning or monster summoning and Latin actually come from? Do you know?
Sorry, to clarify, your question is about the connection between witchcraft, demon summoning, and the Latin language.
Yes.
That is a really great question. It's something that isn't actually really explored in scholarship that I have read, at least thus far. It's something that is, in regard to Latin at least, something that is generally just accepted as it is, and isn't really expanded upon very much. From what I gather, it is because of what you said. It is the language of the church. So because you're speaking the language of the church, therefore it is the most suitable to counteracting evil forces. As for demon summoning and witchcraft, again, it is something that is generally just understood as being inherently associated. Perhaps I haven't done quite as deep research as I should have. But as of right now, it's something that, from what I can gather, is very much just inherent to it.
Okay, So I would like to invite the first three speakers to come to the front of the room, Lauren, Caitlin, and Eli, to join their colleagues as we prepare to conclude our live broadcast and the final part of the program. These young scholars who stand before you have now completed virtually all of the requirements of their master's degree, which will be conferred later this month. And so I ask you to join me in giving them a very warm round of congratulatory applause. And if I could ask the audience's patience while their professors Brian, Sally, Matteo, Ezio, Jonathan, and Sean come up so that we can congratulate them and we have a small gift to present to them. And so just hang on to your seats for one moment while we give them a little gift. Okay. Siamo. Well, that terminates our program, the formal part of the program, and outside of the doors is some cold Prosecco waiting to celebrate. But if you are a graduate of this program, and you all now are, we're going to keep you hostage here for just a few moments while we take a picture of all the alumni. So if you're not an alumna or an alumnus, you can go start having some Prosecco. But if you are, please come to the front of the room. Thank you.